In this story, we'll have a look at our MC who started an entire war and casually wiped out an entire kingdom. After achieving all of his goals, he had nothing else to live for, so he peaced out. Instead of heading to the afterlife, our MC Jack goes back to a time when he was 14. This was when everyone bullied him and was considered an S-grade loser. Now, with years of experience from his past life, he's determined to change the course of his past and get his revenge on those who wronged him. What things are going to be different in this second run of life? Let's find out as we have a look at the moment that started it all. It's a full moon night, and according to our protagonist, turning 34 years old will make you look back on life. He takes a look at the hellish battlefield he's in and wonders what he did wrong with his life. After fighting in some battle, the dude now moves ahead, injured and limping. He wishes to have owned some budget Excalibur or something so he could have stopped his sister from being sent to the Empire. He takes a seat since he's tired, and considers that maybe he wouldn't have become the monster he currently is. But if he didn't do that, who knows if he would have met his master. She's the person who he spent his best moments in life with, and taught him so much when he was a level 1 noob. So he believes he should have been a better student if he knew he would end up going on a killing spree. And of course, the whole scenario wasn't what he wanted. A few thoughts later, a person approaches our mysterious character, and he doesn't look like he's here for a friendly game of Uno. However, the boy is shaking with the sword in hand, and it seems like he doesn't dare to use it. Even though the injured swordsman did his best to not harm children, it appears he's going to die at the hands of one. It turns out he killed the boy's father. So he's here to get revenge after that unfortunate incident. The boy, still with his sword trembling in hand, calls our protagonist a monster. However, that word doesn't bother him anymore. He was curious about what the young hero had to say, but calling him a monster is too basic at this point. Even with all his wounds and how much pain he's going through, he now wants to push himself a bit further. After all the crimes and grave acts he has committed, like ending an entire empire like he's the Doomslayer, our guy is obviously pissed about the basic level insult the kid just called him. Now the boy is even more terrified, but it does remind the mystery person of his early days. He then asks the kid for his name, and the boy introduces himself as Jack Stewart. The dude is surprised to hear this since his name's Jack as well. The boy mentioned he killed his father earlier, but Jack's kill list is so long that he doesn't remember any Stewarts. Now the other Jack begins to cry since he needed his father, although he wasn't a great one. However, Monster Jack's a bit jealous he needed his father. But anyway, he's not going to apologize for ending him. Instead, he gives Boy Jack the opportunity to kill him. After hearing this, Kid Jack's heart begins to race and is panicking about this. If he manages to pull this off, he'll get his revenge and become known as the heroic monster slayer. But the truth is that Monster Jack can easily regenerate and escape. But nah, he ain't doing that. So the boy steps forward to execute Jack, but he begins to shake. Then he falls to his knees, dropping his sword, and begins to cry. Even though he's unable to finish the job, Monster Jack commends his choice since Boy Jack would end up regretting that forever. At first, people would consider him a hero. Then it'll just get crazy from there. So he tells the boy not to live a life full of regrets like he did. Then Jack continues to cry, and the other Jack feels like crying too. Probably just a Jack thing. So in the end, the monster declares himself dead, and the war is now over. However, the boy wonders why Jack lived a life of so much bloodshed despite being powerful. But even he doesn't know the answer to that. From there, he begins to sway, falls, dies, and refuses to elaborate. At this point, Jack is beginning to lose all sensations. But at the last moment, a thought pops into his mind. He wonders if he could change the path of his life, if he could start over. And with that, he finally bites the dust. Now we've seen how Jack died, next is to look at who he was. In his past, he wasn't the most lucky protagonist. His father hated him because why not? And his mother died the moment he was born. So the only way he knew what she looked like was through a portrait. He had 2 siblings, making them 3 if we include Jack. His sister was the eldest one and was really pretty, while his older brother tormented him because, yes. It turns out our protagonist's full name is Jack Valentier, and he had enough of his family gotten from bad RNG. So he abandoned his name and became a mad swordsman who traveled the continent. However, in the current moment, he finds it hard to know if he's dreaming. He wonders if he's actually dead, or it's just one of those anime flashback moments. Well, either way, it's pretty insane to him. In his previous life, Bro casually started World War II, and he won it. However, he began his slow descent into madness, becoming a heartless ruler and a monster. He found revenge and made it his life goal, and this made him end an entire bloodline of the Thulkan Empire. From there, he continued his conquest and eventually achieved all his goals. So, which was why Jack accepted his death, since he had nothing else to live for. But moving on to the current moment, he discovers that he's been factory reset for some reason. He checks himself, finds that everything that happened is very real, and wonders what sorcery is this. His family, House Valentier, belonged to the Thessalan kingdom, and is a noble family that swore allegiance to the royal family. Out of 3 siblings, Jack was the youngest born of a marquess. He was allowed to live comfortably as long as he didn't get any big dreams like any other protagonist would and become the head of the family. But at least that's in other families, not in House Valentier. Jack hangs out at the Rose Garden, which is pretty much an isolated villa in the estate. While it does have a pretty name and looks nice with all the flowers, it's also called the Villa of Exile, and it's basically solitary confinement for the youngest member of the family. Jack takes a seat on a platform and takes a look around. Shortly, his one and only servant, butler, and pretty much the only person he can consider family shows up and offers Jack a drink. His name is Ron, and Jack knows he's a slightly shady person. Jack teases him about putting poison in his drink. But of course, Ron would never do such a thing. Maybe. But anyway, it was all a joke, and Jack's actually grateful for Ron's service. Then Ron thanks him with a smile and leaves. Other than Jack, there are 11 other people present at the Rose Garden. One of them is Ron, and the other 10 are the random NPC guards. However, Jack doesn't really care about what the guards do, but more importantly, he wonders what to do next. So he just chills. But he doesn't even know if what he's seeing is real, since the last time he checked, he wasn't a time traveler, and he doesn't have any plans. Currently, he's 14 years old, and he doesn't have a callus on his hand and doesn't have mana as well. With this fact, he already knows that he's a weakling compared to other children his age. Shortly, Jack has a visitor, but he doesn't notice him and continues with his thought. Then a sudden smack on the head resonates within him and brings him back to reality. At first, he's confused about what's going on. Then he holds his head from the pain. This feeling's something that he hasn't felt in decades. On top of that, his fresh glass of Tomto juice is now ruined. So he wonders who's responsible for this. He takes a glance, and it's his elder brother who mentions the fact his little brother didn't greet him. Of course, Jack pretty much hates him and gives him a death stare. Apparently, this person is Phelan Valentier, the second child of House Valentier. And it turns out it's because of his threats that Jack couldn't train his mana. So Jack is obviously pissed to meet him, and he stands up to face his brother. Jack meets with his older brother, and he doesn't like him at all. Even with all the time that has passed, there's no way he'll forget about the torture he's gone through. In a past memory, Phelan had dumped some tea over Jack, calling him useless. On top of that, he threatened to kill Jack if he ever dreamt of learning magic or swordsmanship. Even though the blood of the Marquess flowed through his veins, Phelan made sure that Jack only lived out his life as a background character. If he did all that, then just maybe, Phelan might consider Jack as his brother. Once he becomes the Marquess, that is. But anyway, in that past, Jack was considered a weakling. He was so weak that it was embarrassing at this point. People within the family always made fun of him, and the rumors were much worse outside the family. Even the commoners would mock him whether he's a noble or not. However, all this didn't just happen by coincidence. The people who were behind this were Phelan and his mother's side of the family, House Mantiz. But either way, Jack has nothing to say to him since the eldest child of the family is a woman. It turns out the only person who was ever nice to Jack was his older sister. She was a year older than Phelan, but unfortunately, genetics wasn't on her side, so she couldn't become the next head of the family since she wasn't a man. Even with her being the eldest in the family, and lucked out with beauty, she wasn't so fortunate since her fate had already been set up for her. She ended up getting married off to a family her father found favorable, but ended up getting locked up to bear children for the rest of her life. With how her destiny was set out, Phelan is also the person who exploited her the most. He would talk about her with the Duke's son and the royal family in not very family-friendly ways. With all those in mind, Jack glares at his brother and figures he'd be better off dead. Of course, Phelan doesn't like Jack's look, so he tries to punch him. But Jack defends himself by grabbing his hand. As you would expect, Phelan is shocked by this, and even the guards are surprised as well. Phelan is outraged by this action, but before he can complete his statement, Jack karate tosses him into some furniture. Phelan is surprised by this while Jack dusts himself off. Of course, Phelan doesn't like this at all. He begins to use his mana and wants to draw his sword against an unarmed 14-year-old child. The guards around the villa notice he's about to use mana and consider stopping him. However, they forget about it since Phelan won't be happy about that. Jack notices that the guards aren't trying to stop Phelan and scoffs. He finds the situation a bit funny, and then Ron interferes with the fight, telling Phelan to stop. Ron tells him to get a hold of himself since the current place isn't suited to be recklessly spending mana, but Phelan doesn't care and punches him out of the way. Even with the fact Ron just got harmed, Jack isn't worried at all since Ron's a man of many secrets. After that, Phelan plans to have Jack and his servant killed for being disrespectful, but Jack taunts him saying that he talks too much. This comment makes him lose it as he draws his sword. At this time in Jack's life, he has never trained or even has any kind of mana. However, he's still confident that he'll bring the pain to his brother this time around. Phelan swings his sword, but Jack easily ducks and closes the distance between them. As a third circle user, Phelan's wrapping himself with mana and is using a fancy sword that's not equal to his actual sword skills. As Jack dashes towards Phelan, he wonders if he should just toss him. But in the end, he figures that his older brother needs more than just throwing around. Apparently, Phelan has covered his body with basic mana as a third circle user. Then Jack finally decides what action he'll take. He grabs Phelan's face and slams his head into a nearby pillar. Now his skull might be broken, Jack wants to repay his brother with a percentage of the humiliation he's gone through so far. That slam does a number on Phelan, then he falls to the ground and passes out. Now that has happened. Everyone in the villa watches this speechlessly. A guard reaches for his sword, but Jack stops him. He warns him with a cold stare to forget about that action. If not, he'll probably lose a kneecap. Somehow this threat works, and the knight backs off. So with that out of the way, Jack grabs Phelan's hair and drags him across the ground. He considers his brother heavy. Then he arrives at a pool of water and a new idea is formed. He dips Phelan's head into the pool of water. At first, there is no response, but after a while, he begins to struggle. Jack figures he was so startled that he never got a chance to use his mana. While Jack casually drowns his brother, he recalls that Phelan was also responsible for several other incidents within House Valentier. Just after Elizabeth was married off, Phelan poisoned his father. After that, he became the new Marquess and carried on with being a grade A scumbag. That ended up causing the bad ending of House Valentier. Since he never achieved anything, the family was no more. However, Jack could care less about the family or his father. The only reason he's mad at his brother is because Elizabeth's sacrifice turned out to be all for nothing. She was a bright and cheery lady who was also kind. But even with that, who could tell how she felt when she was being married off to the Empire? She knew what was in store for her, and left to the Empire for the sake of her family. Plus, the person she was getting married to was the fourth prince of the Empire, and he was the kind of guy who'd make a corrupt politician look like a saint. It turns out, on the day of Elizabeth's wedding, the dude let her know she's not even his lawful wife and tells her to play along with the wedding. And because Elizabeth cared for her family, she had to endure it. But what's happened has happened. He figures he might turn into the Hulk out of anger if he keeps thinking about it. Then Jack sees a sight he never thought he would ever see. His older brother is terrified and is begging for help. However, this look of terror reminds him of the faces of people he saw in his past life. It's the one his victims made when they were scared of death. But anyway, Jack gives Phelan the chance to think about his past actions. However, he can't remember anything, and it's at this point he's realized the importance of family. Then Jack prepares the final punch, but Phelan begins to apologize and begs him to stop. But it's someone else's pleas that actually stops Jack from starting his kill list early. It's from his servant Ron, who tells him not to do that. Jack listens to him, but he still doesn't want to let Phelan go just like that. So he smashes his head against the side of the pool and lets him go. He then orders a guard to take whatever's left of Phelan away from him. Luckily, he isn't dead yet. As the guard goes to check on him, Jack dusts his hands for a job well done. Then he bumps into Ron as he passes by. Of course, he doesn't say anything about this. As you would expect, the news about Jack's behavior spread throughout the family like a wildfire, and everyone is not pleased with this. After the incident, a couple of servants rush the unconscious Phelan to tend to his wounds. It turns out he's Jack's stepbrother, and he has the support of his mother's side of the family, House Mantis. On top of that, he is on his way to becoming the head of House Valentier. However, as soon as his mother takes a look at the beaten-up future successor, she passes out just like her son. Normally, Phelan was meant to become the next head of House Valentier, but after Jack bashed his face up, he became bedridden and is now scared of water. And of course, the family was very much upset about this. After this incident, many rumors started going round as well. Phelan was considered a talented individual who became a third circle at the age of 17. But somehow, he lost a battle against his weak younger brother who was never trained in anyway. So the question is, what kind of power is Jack hiding? And why did he decide to reveal it at the moment? The next year, Phelan will become 18 years old and will be appointed the successor when that happens. Of course, the rumors keep going on. Some even suggest that Jack was jealous of this position. But all that remains to be seen is how Marcus Valentier will react to the situation. Speaking of that, he orders for Jack to be brought to him. Then there's Jack, who's having some cake. A few servants burst into the room to give Ron the update, and he's surprised to hear what's up. He then informs Jack that Marquis Valentier has ordered for him in the main building immediately. So Jack gets up from his seat and begins to head out. Ron offers to escort him, but Jack insists on going there on his own. With that, Ron wishes his master the best as he heads on his way. As he makes his way through the building, people begin to gossip about Jack. With all the death stares being sent his way, it has been a while since he's ever gotten this much attention. However, Jack doesn't care what a few randos think, and just wants to end the situation as soon as possible. He reaches out to open the door to Marcus Valentier's quarters, but the guards in front of the room stop him. Not a word is heard from any of them, and it almost seems like they're trying to mock Jack too. At this point, the whole thing seems ridiculous, so Jack tries to get their attention, but he receives the silent treatment. Then he kicks the knee of one of the guards, trying to get some kind of reply while others watch him. Now, the guard has a look that either screams constipated or just angry. Normal Jack would have been scared after seeing that, but he calmly tells the guard to get rid of that look or someone will have to clean him off the floor. The guard finally responds to Jack's threat, asking for what he said. But Jack kicks him again. This time, the guard clearly feels the impact and gets on the ground in pain. Jack informs him that Marquess Valentier has called for him and asks why he's being denied entry. The guard gets back up and has been ordered not to reveal that information. So with that in mind, Jack figures his father's using this as a way to tell him to reflect on his actions before he's let in. He begins to leave and the guard wonders where he's going. Jack knows that this isn't worth his time anymore and tells the guard that his father should come see him instead, if what he has to say is that important. After seeing his response, both of the guards' jaws drop at the level of insolence shown by Jack. This incident that happened later gets reported to Marquess Valentier. The Marquess scoffs at what has just happened, and he rises from his seat. At this point, he figures that Jack is a different person at this point. Jack waits outside the villa for his father. However, it doesn't take long until he notices something in the distance. It's his father, who's arriving to meet with Jack with an entire convoy. With a face like his, one would definitely think he's the stubborn type, and he's just as Jack remembered him. The Marquess finally stops, and Jack on the other hand figures things would have been much better without his father. He's such a greedy man who couldn't make his ambitions come true. At one point, he tried to kill Jack in his previous life for running away from home, and he even threw his own son to a bunch of thugs, just to gain more power. Of course, with all he has done, there's no way Jack would consider someone like him as his father. But anyway, the Marquess asks why he did what he did, but Jack exchanges a cold stare and asks what he's talking about. This show of attitude from Jack causes Phelan's mother to freak out in a loud and annoying manner. With how far Marquess Valentier has come, Jack asks if he would like to head inside or discuss things with him outside. Jack then tosses a plate to the side, and once it shatters, the Marquess begins to flare up with mana. Jack learns that he's secretly checking if he has a mana heart. But unluckily for him, he doesn't have anything. Marquess Valentier then asks if he's been working out recently, and wonders why he hid it until the current moment. Of course, no one will believe Jack if he says he's from the future, so he takes a sip of his drink and pretty much says he just wanted to. Again, Phelan's mom is angry at his smug response but calms down after the Marquess raises his hand. He on the other hand figures that Jack is useful after all, but this comment annoys him instead. With how his father put it, he wonders if he won't be considered his son if he's useless. This makes Marquess Valentier ask if Jack would like to be recognized as his son, but the ship for wanting fatherly love has sailed a long time ago. Everyone is shocked that Jack would turn down his father's offer. But still, the Marquess begins to leave without any further explanation. Jack is surprised that his father is leaving just like that and wonders why he even bothered coming. As the convoy heads out, Jack calls out to Phelan's mother, activates troll mode, and points out the fact she's gained more wrinkles. He figures it might be because of Phelan and wants to suggest a beauty regimen to her. As you would expect, she's outraged by this taunt, but seeing this look on her face gives Jack pure joy. So with that, he bids his wonderful family farewell and says he's sorry about the Phelan incident. Later on, Ron informs Jack he's been placed in solitary confinement for 20 days. From there, he scolds Jack and wonders what on earth must have gone down in the main building. However, Jack tells him to relax and is also annoyed about how loud he is. When Jack used to get beaten up by Phelan, no one would say anything. But when Jack does it, he's now a criminal. Speaking of solitary confinement, Jack wonders what kind of punishment he'll be facing. While he scribbles up a masterpiece, he also figures the Rose Garden is a place of solitude on its own. But still, he's going to be confined even more than this. The academy Jack attends will resume in less than a month, and now he's getting this. The mention of this academy reminds Jack that he'll have to go to school again. Since he's 14, he'll have to attend the Royal Academy. It's a place where all the noble children of the Thessalon Kingdom go to learn, just like any regular school. It takes 4 years to graduate, and since Jack was newly admitted, he's currently in his first year. He's completed his first semester and is currently on summer vacation. What's more important is that his master from his previous life has close ties with the academy, and he's determined to reunite with her no matter what. While he becomes the next Picasso, Jack figures he must go to the academy and doesn't have any time to waste with the Marquess. Jack wonders how he managed to survive such mistreatment. Then he figures that there are 27 vacation days left. Since his confinement is 20 days and it takes 6 to get to the academy, he figures that his father wants him to head straight to school after punishment. However, it's still hard for him to understand how he returned to the past. After Jack finishes up his artwork, he asks his servant where he's to be confined. At first, Ron is hesitant to say, but after a bit of persuasion, he reveals that he'll be confined where the criminals of the domain are locked up. So in other words, prison. Jack gets gloomy after he hears this and is outraged by his father's decision. Normally, vacation for the noble children who attend the academy is more like an extension of school. For instance, before Phelan's skull was split open, he always attended social parties during the vacation to make connections with other nobles and also meet his vassals. Then there's Jack in prison, who never had opportunities like that. Plus, he had no interest in the Marquess title. With how his life went, it was almost like House Valentier never accepted him as a part of the family. It turns out Jack had left for prison way before the knights came for him. While he was being handcuffed, Ron cried as he was taken off to his cell. But Jack decided to hurry away before Ron would find another way to make him more embarrassed. Now back to the present moment. Jack is in his cell, and it's not as bad as he thought. It has all the basic stuff: a bed, a toilet, and 3 meals a day. But there's a catch, since this is a prison. The bed sheets look like they've been there ever since the time of dinosaurs, and the food looks like lunchly in its purest form. Jack finds the entire situation to be horrible, no matter how he thinks about it. It turns out that nobles who own a domain can punish the citizens by their own laws. So this pretty much means that the lord of a domain can live like a king. Even though Jack is still the son of Marquess Valentier, his own father abandoned him and even went so far as to put him in prison. Jack wonders how the family will cover up for their precious golden child. At first he figures that they might announce that he uses some sort of poison artifact or something, but that'll probably sound too basic. So he imagines another possibility. In this one, he learned dark magic out of greed. Then Phelan caught him and tried to set him straight. But instead of listening, he attacked his older brother using dark magic, which caused his head injury, and Phelan forgave him for this anyway. Jack is positive this is the kind of scenario the Marquess and Marchioness are brewing up, and the thought of this makes Jack want to jump off a cliff. This thought gets him all frustrated, and he plans to break out after a few days, since a prison cell isn't exactly the best place to have a vacation. He also wants to escape from such a loving household, but the only things holding him back are his older sister, Elizabeth, Ron, and his master. But more importantly, his current body is pretty weak at around 5'5" and 121 pounds. From his view, the world is pretty much a jungle that operates on survival of the fittest. According to him, the only reason he survived in his previous life was because he was strong, so he took everything he wanted. However, this time, he doesn't intend to go on the genocide route like a certain World War II individual I won't mention. But there are still some things he has to take care of. Right now, he needs time and power, and he can get both of those at the academy. He plans to recruit the talented individuals of the academy in the meantime, so he can secure the power he once had. Then he'll be able to protect the ones who he cares about: Ron, Elizabeth, and his master. So he has to do what must be done. Jack then creates a kind of spark with his hand that seems to be mana. In the world, mana users are divided into 10 ranks. The 1st to 3rd circle users are beginners. 4th to 6th are experts. 7th to 9th are high circle mana users. Then there's the final 10th circle users, who are called masters and considered superhumans at that point. Truth be told, Jack needed a place where people wouldn't watch him, and it apparently takes 2 hours to form 1 mana circle. Jack creates a ball of mana in his hand and figures it's because he started mana training at 17. He plays with it for a while until the sound of footsteps alerts him. He quickly makes the mana ball disappear since he can't let anyone discover his secret yet, and wonders who it could be. He pretends to be asleep and considers it could be the Marchioness who came to scream his ears off. But the footsteps are too light for it to be hers. This person stops in front of Jack's cell and calls out to him. He flinches once he hears this and springs out of bed since it's a voice he recognizes. It's the voice of someone whom he used to see in his dreams, and if it weren't for his memories, he probably wouldn't have seen her. It turns out his mystery visitor is his older sister, Elizabeth Valentier. He goes to meet her, and she on the other hand checks up on her younger brother. Of course, Jack is relieved to see her since she's still the kind and beautiful person he remembered her to be. Elizabeth checks on her little brother and calls him Jackie. This is a nickname he hasn't heard in decades. So he gets all teary-eyed and lets her sister know he's all right. She wonders why he resorted to dark magic since she could teach him magic whenever he wanted. She sympathizes with her brother, but Jack is lost in the moment. Elizabeth then brings him back to Earth. With how he was absent-minded, she wonders if her brother is okay. He wipes his face, and he is, but he's just glad he's actually seeing his sister and isn't dreaming about it. This makes Elizabeth a bit worried. Then Jack suggests an idea. He proposes that they run away to the mountains, but Elizabeth seems sad over the suggestion. Jack is aware of how Phelan and his mother treat her, so he suggests that they leave for somewhere peaceful while they search for a proper suitor for her. He also says something about the Marquess, but Elizabeth cuts his sentence short by yelling his name, which startles him a bit. It appears the Stockholm Syndrome is strong in this one, She convinces Jack that even with everything that has happened, the Marquis is still their father, so she tells him not to say anything like that again since he still raised them. With how Jack has been looked down on by the Marquis, she's determined to try and change his mind. So in summary, she tells Jack to trust her and endure the pain for a bit longer. All she has said reminds Jack about what he heard in his past life, and he figures he really did go back in time. He tells her sister it's nice to see her again after a long while, and Elizabeth blushes over this remark. Then Jack stands up and asks her to step away from the cell door. When she does that, he gathers some mana in his hand and shatters the gate's lock. Elizabeth is shocked by this and wonders how he learned to make a mana circle. While she's still confused, Jack rushes to her and hugs her. He begins to cry and apologizes to her, but Elizabeth is very much confused about his behavior, so she holds him back and is even more worried about her brother being okay. Again, Jack lets her know he's okay and hugs her again. He promises her that things are going to be different from the last time and is also going to make sure she lives the life she wants. After hearing that, Elizabeth begins to pat Jack on the back. However, he isn't acting like this towards Elizabeth for no reason. It turns out that in his past life, he interrogated the fourth prince, the person who married Elizabeth. After finding out the prince did some actions to her that probably could make Jack the Ripper sound like a lullaby, this began his slow descent into madness. He's the only person who knows what horrible things that will happen to her. Of course, there was no way Jack could forgive him after what he did. So this explains why he wiped out the entire Thulkan imperial family, starting with the prince. It's now backstory time. In Jack's past life, he ran away from home at 17, and 10 years later, the Theslan kingdom and House Valantier were destroyed. The Thulkan Empire took over all of the western continent. However, there were still a few survivors of House Valantier. Elizabeth was shocked to learn her family was imprisoned, so she got on her knees and begged the fourth prince to spare them. Unfortunately, she wasn't the prince's lawful wife, so he shoved her away and ignored her request. However, Elizabeth never gave up. She even begged under the rain for 4 whole days, and in the end, the emperor and fourth prince took pity on her and agreed to her request. At least that was the happy version that was told throughout the continent. Jack had discovered the real truth. Later on, Elizabeth went to thank the prince for this kind action, but it turns out it wasn't so kind after all. Even though he spared her family, he lets her know he can easily destroy them and uses this to blackmail her into doing whatever he wants. From there, let's just say she belonged to the streets. Not only was she the fourth prince's plaything, but to the emperor and third prince as well. As a result, the actual lawful wives had to do something about it. After a while, the fourth prince abandoned Elizabeth, and then the lawful wives locked her up in a villa, leaving her to her own demise. Around this time, House Valantier had fallen, and by the time Jack heard this story, he was already a powerful person. So he went full-on Itachi mode on the Thulkan Empire and eliminated anything and everything related to them. He didn't just stop there, he also destroyed all the families that were related to the Thulkan imperial family in any way, shape, or form. And the Thulkan Empire was completely wiped from history. However, now that he looks back at that story, it sounds too horrible for a future. As Elizabeth tells her younger brother to look after his health, Jack is determined to change the course of things from his previous life. Later on, Elizabeth heads back and she knows that Jack is a different person. Now, he's not the boy who used to run away and hide, and she figures it's probably better like this. But anyway, she finds it hard to believe that Jack used dark magic. She's a 6th circle mage, and she couldn't sense any traces of it on him. Plus, she's sure her father, who's a 7th circle mage, would have known. So she figures that the whole story must have been the Marchioness's doing. Anyway, she goes to meet with her father and asks for Jack to be released from his cell. She's convinced Jack never learned dark magic, and is sure her sweet little brother would never learn such an evil thing from myths and legends. However, she believes her father would find it troublesome to tell the world the truth. After a brief silence, she informs the Marquis that Jack has no interest in becoming the successor, but he just tells her to go on. She pauses and then figures that's a warning from her father. After hearing her guess, Marquess Valantier confirms she's correct. As the bright child she is, she realized her fate and could tell she's just a tool used to boost the family's reputation. And what she just experienced was a warning that something will happen to Jack if she deviated from her set path. Since Jack doesn't fit in with the family, the Marquis has a plan for when Jack comes of age. He plans to hide his identity and send him off to live a normal life somewhere else, then break the news to everyone that he died. Elizabeth is shocked when she learns this, and until then, she has to play her role. However, the one thing that's strange to the Marquess is the fact Jack took down Phelan without a circle. Elizabeth is shocked to hear this, and then wonders what she saw when Jack broke the prison lock. But anyway, all that has already happened, and Marquess Valantier agrees to let him out of jail. With that, Elizabeth bows and thanks her father, then she leaves. When she shuts the door to the room, she recalls what Jack said about running away. She then begins to cry since she believes it's impossible to run away from a fate that has been decided for her. It's a brand new day, and life is going as usual for Jack, who's in prison. He believes to have dreamed of his past life and figures it's probably because he's not used to jail. But either way, it wasn't a good one. Shortly, a guard arrives and informs Jack that he's free to go in a rude manner. Jack gets triggered by this, but he decides to remain calm. He thanks the guard for bringing his clothes and shoes, but the knight refuses to let go when Jack tries to take them. Even though he's always treated like trash, he still finds it absurd that some no-name NPC side character also wants to do the same. The guard refuses to give Jack his shoes and tells him that he's getting on his nerves. Now this is where Jack loses it. He faces up to the guard, while the knight begins to regret all his life decisions. Now the time for talking is over, and Jack charges up his fist and attacks the knight. And who knows if he made it out of that one. Eventually, Jack arrives at the rose garden. Then Ron calls out to him. Now that Jack has been released, he's worried if his master is fine, but Jack is okay. Then Ron spots a bloodstain on his clothes and wonders what has gone down in the cell. But Jack assures him that it's not his blood. But anyway, Jack notices the new faces around the villa. There are 10 new foot soldiers, and a page from the Iron Blood Order was brought in. Jack observes that one dude who looks like he's been grinding for loot and experience points, and figures he's the page of the Iron Blood Order. However, Jack pities him since babysitting wasn't what he had in mind when he became a knight. But then, a guard comes over to report what happened in the cell to that knight. After hearing that, he heads over to Jack and asks for his story on what happened. The fact he's polite is enough to shock Jack. However, the knight is a bit nervous, but he mentions the fact that the victim guard had lost a finger and an eye when Jack was done with him. Ron doesn't believe him, but the knight figures that he has the right to inquire. Then Jack switches into villain mode to respond, leaving the knight shocked to hear his reply. From his movement, mana sensitivity, and position of his feet, Jack can easily tell he's a fourth circle. It turns out this person is from House Mantiz, the same one as Phelan's mother, so he switches up for him. The page finds his response to be too harsh for no reason. Even Ron steps in to make Jack cool it. But anyway, with an annoyed expression, Jack states that the page's job is to watch over him and tells him to sort out things outside of that on his own. So he has to watch over Jack, and even if Jack ends up causing trouble, he believes that the page should be begging him to stop. And with that, the knight apologizes. Now that's settled, Jack begins to leave and tells the page to sort out the issue of the guard on his own. As he goes on his way, Jack instructs his new guard to take all complaints to the Marquess. On top of that, he finds it annoying to call him a page, so he demotes him to Chickling and tells him to come to him the moment he calls. And with that, he pats Ron on the back and they both leave. On the other hand, the page begins to wonder what he has just signed up for. On the way back, Jack's stomach begins to rumble and he tells Ron that he's craving some meat. So Ron goes to make preparations. A while later, the meals have been prepared, so Jack begins to eat and he enjoys it. He commends Ron's skill as a chef. While Ron thanks his master for the compliment, he does look nervous. Jack prompts him to say anything he has left to say, but Ron says it's nothing. So from there, Jack offers some food to Ron and asks him to join the meal. Jack asks Ron to join him for a bite. After some hesitation, he declines since he believes he's not worthy enough to eat with his lord. However, Jack insists and adds that he has something to tell him as well. So Ron finally agrees. Jack wonders how Elizabeth's been doing, and Ron replies that she's all right. Then Jack presumes that Ron is aware of Elizabeth's current problem, and the mention of this startles Ron a bit. He says he's not sure what he's talking about, while Jack takes a fork of spaghetti. After that, he comments on Ron's talent as a chef again. The main reason Jack has been able to eat food safely in the past was thanks to Ron. He always made sure that none of the cooking ingredients were ever poisoned. Ron is surprised Jack knows about this, but that's not all he's hiding. Jack also reveals he's a ninth circle magician at the moment, and this accurate guess leaves Ron speechless. He's also been around ever since Jack's mother has been alive. Even though Jack has never seen his mother, he's sure she was a nice person after hearing how his older sister takes after her. And not only that, Ron has also been protecting her from the shadows. The fact a ninth circle magician is a servant sounds ridiculous, but it's actually true. When Jack ran away from home in his past life, Ron escorted him, and they had to escape from pursuers the Marquess had hired to kill Jack. It turns out the people chasing them were a part of the Iron Blood Order, the same one as Mr. Chickling from earlier. At the time, the commander was a ninth circle swordsman, and Ron eventually sacrificed himself to protect Jack. Apparently, Jack was scared of Ron since he was a ninth circle user in charge of protecting his mother. As for his mother, it turns out she wasn't a commoner and no one knew about it. Not even the Marquess or Ron. But either way, Jack decides to forget about it because what's more important is who Ron is currently. Ron finally speaks and wonders what his master wants. So Jack explains that he wants him to protect Elizabeth since he's one of the few people he trusts. However, Ron believes she's capable of handling herself since she became a 6th circle at 18 years old. But the problem is that she's too kind and will easily sacrifice herself. Sacrificing for the family is the one thing Jack doesn't want her to do. Jack will be leaving for the academy on the next day and doesn't plan to come back unless it's an emergency. So he tells Ron to guard her for the next 4 years, and after that, he should live his life according to how he wishes. Ron wonders why 4 years, but Jack responds by that time he'll be strong enough to protect Elizabeth by himself. Just as he's about to reveal who he's protecting her from, there's a knock on the door. Even Jack is annoyed by this cliffhanger, but he tells the person to come in. The door opens and the person comes in. It's the page from the Iron Blood Order, and he came to report what happened to the guard. The injured guard was sent to a medic, and as for what happened, we get a beautifully made-up story of how the guard cut his finger in training, lost control of his sword, and poked his eye with it. So Jack ran away after seeing that. After hearing this is going to be the recorded story, Jack commends the knight and teases him as the dog that he's been demoted to. Then Jack calls for his chickling, but the knight's annoyed at this point. He reveals his name as James Canta. Either way, Jack asks James to fetch him a real sword and a wooden one. However, James refuses to comply with this errand. Jack figures that the knight before him has quite the ego, and grants him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Since he can tell James doesn't like him, Jack grants him the chance to beat him up, and Ron is shocked by this. Then Jack shows James his hand and gives him the chance to guess how many times he's grabbed a sword. With this conversation, James believes that Jack wants him to be his swordsmanship instructor. However, Jack laughs at his theory and asks him to bring the swords. Now that a fight has been arranged, Ron wonders if Jack will be alright. He reminds Jack that James is at the 4th circle and wonders if he'll be able to fight him. Then Jack decides to make a bet with Ron to see if he can beat James, while James searches for a sword. Ron thinks about this for a while. Then he suggests making a bet on the number of times Jack will get hit. Jack agrees with his idea and asks how much Ron will be betting. However, Ron gives a reminder that James is on a much different level. You wouldn't blame him for saying that since it's difficult to trust a 14-year-old who hasn't trained in any way. Anyway, Jack sets the difficulty on extreme and says that Ron will win if he gets hit once. Then he adds that the loser has to grant the winner's wish. However, Ron doesn't seem to buy this idea. Since he's a servant, he informs Jack that he should let him know if there's something he wants him to do. Jack tells him that he's one of the 2 people he trusts in the household. Additionally, he only makes requests to those he trusts. So with that said, Ron has no choice but to agree with the bet. Shortly, James returns and he kneels before Jack. He apologizes for the issue that happened between them earlier, offers to spar with Jack, and asks him to reconsider what he said earlier. It turns out there are several people who disrespect Jack. However, indirect mockery and direct contact are 2 different stories. It appears James is scared of what's going to happen, which is why he's talking like that. So, Jack suggests that they go to a private training room, and suggests that James is scared, which gets him triggered. He denies being afraid, so Jack asks if James will be the winner of the duel. But he remains quiet, confirming Jack's thoughts from earlier. Then Jack asks Ron for a place where they can spar in private, and he knows of a place like that. He leads them to a training facility in the manor's basement, and Jack is surprised a place like that existed. He wonders if Ron trains at the place, but it was actually Jack's mother, Lady Noah, who ordered the place to be built for her children, and Jack never knew of it since exercising wasn't his thing. Jack looks around and finds that the place is spotless, even with how he never visited it. So with a smile, he figures Ron is behind this fact, and thanks him for his service. Unfortunately, the smile disappears when it comes to James, and Jack orders for a wooden sword in a pretty harsh manner. Now with a sword in hand, James points out that Jack seems used to holding a sword. But with the amount of people he slayed in his past life, of course he would be used to it. So he thanks his opponent for the compliment and charges at him. Jack swings his sword, but James blocks the attack easily. He believes Jack is a novice and plans to suppress him with a few tricks. But while he's still planning his moves, Jack has already won the battle by pointing his blade at James's jaw. Of course, everyone is surprised by this swift action. At this point, James is lucky this wasn't an encounter in Jack's past life. However, what's confusing to him is how Jack, a person who should be wielding a sword for the first time, found an opening to win. Ron is confused about what just happened. He is sure that James blocked Jack's attack easily. What he expected to happen is that James would push Jack's sword lightly, which would be too much force for Jack to handle, and the fight would be over. However, Jack's moves are accurate and perfect, and he's convinced that James could have been killed if they were using real swords. Ron wonders what happened to Jack since he's never even held a sword before. He figures that his young master might just be a genius, but even a genius can't be so efficient with a sword on the first try. On the other hand, Jack wonders how old Chicken Man is, and it turns out he's 23. In addition, James started mana training at 18, which means it took him 5 years to become a 4th circle. With that fact, Jack figures he's pretty talented even with how late he started training. Jack analyzes that he has enough potential to become an 8 circle, and a commander on top of that. Then Jack drops his wooden sword and has now switched from survival to hardcore mode. He picks up a real sword and thinks about how James, despite his talent, was assigned to babysitting. When Jack picks up the sword, James warns him that he'll get hurt, but Jack laughs at this. He has now gone villain mode and points out the fact James seems to think the earlier victory was by luck. James goes on full guard and seems to be a bit annoyed. Then Jack taunts him, which makes James angry. He loses it and charges in for an attack. Jack sees how easy it is to get him riled up, which is why he'll always be a page. The two of them clash swords, but Jack disarms James, making him the winner once again. James is shocked by this and wonders how he made that move. Jack explains that he simply changed directions when their swords clashed, which is called an advanced technique. At this point, who's even the instructor here? Of course, James is furious, so he goes to get a real sword as well. While he does that, Jack reminds Ron of the bet they made, and his wish is the same as earlier, to protect Elizabeth. So with that, Ron agrees with it. James believes that the next battle will be different, but Jack calls Cap. The only different thing is that the two of them can use mana now. With that, Jack leaps into the air to attack. James blocks the attack, but he isn't strong enough. So the sword leaves his hand again, and the force drives him to the ground. From there, Jack stomps his chest, and man lost 3 battles in seconds. He wonders if Jack is actually a 3rd circle since there's no way for a 1st circle to be so strong. Jack figures that his confusion is understandable since a 1st circle beating a 4th doesn't add up. But what he did was he focused all his mana on one part of his body to increase its ability, rather than all over. Out of nowhere, Jack wonders if James really wants to become a knight. James, on the other hand, is confused by his question and asks what else he can do, if not that. So Jack gives him the offer of becoming his loyal hound that takes orders from him rather than becoming a knight. After Jack's proposal, James wonders what he can get out of it. Jack believes that he should be asking about the kind of tasks he'll be getting, but either way, he reveals that James will gain power and authority if he works for him. And for the tasks, he'll have to protect Jack and also become an assassin. Of course, this fact shocks James, and he wonders who he'll have to assassinate. This person is most likely Phelan, who's still traumatized and in bed. So he gives James a day to decide, and for the sake of himself, he has to make the right decision. A time skip later, while Ron gives Jack a massage, he suggests that his master is being a bit too reckless by trusting James. But obviously, there's nothing that'll make Jack trust him. He already knows that James is on the way to report everything to the Marchioness. Since Jack is leaving the next day, Ron believes she might use that as a chance to kill Jack. However, Jack knows that's not possible. Even though she's still searching for revenge after making Phelan terrified of water, she can't make any moves since the Marquess is still alive. Besides, she needs Jack to force Elizabeth to do what she wants, so he's confident she won't kill him. On top of all that, Jack's move to the academy has already been planned, so the worst she can probably do is break an arm or leg. But more importantly, no one ever managed to kill Jack. Even some powerful figures like a Harpy Lord, an Orc Lord, and a Dragon Lord failed to accomplish this. Then what good can some random noble Karen do? In the end, Jack thanks his servant for the massage. He was aching all over since he doesn't exercise regularly. As he stands up, he tells Ron not to worry and says he won't die unless he wants to. After hearing his statement, Ron wonders if Jack has an idea of how he'll die, and out of all the things, he does. He also tells Ron that he can't accompany him normally. So if he's curious about what will happen, Ron will have to follow him secretly. After that, there's another thing Jack has to say. He informs Ron that he'll be creating his 2nd circle, so Jack instructs him not to let anyone into his room. Ron is surprised after hearing this because it's apparently a difficult task, but Jack wonders what the fuss is all about since it's child's play for him. So with that, Ron agrees with his request. Meanwhile, James is still pretty salty after losing to a 1st circle. He believes Jack is a 3rd circle, and is a gifted child on top of that. However, one thing he found absurd was Jack's offer to become his hound. Jack neither has the support of other families nor loyal vassals, and is pretty much a nobody. He pauses for a while, and he begins to have Vietnam War flashbacks of Jack. Then he decides to break the news to the Marchioness concerning that conversation and Jack's combat talent. Now he sees this as a way to get a secure ride to the top. While Jack may be a genius, James knows that he won't be able to overthrow his family unless the plot armor works for him. In a different location, the Marchioness and Elizabeth have a chat, obviously not a friendly one. She considers Elizabeth to be subhuman as long as the fact her mother was a commoner stands. Other than Elizabeth's looks, the Marchioness holds her to 0 regard. After that, the Marchioness offers her a drink, and Elizabeth doesn't seem to be in a position to decline. Elizabeth rejects the offer because she doesn't believe she can drink before the Marchioness. So with that, the Marchioness downs her glass of wine. She then reveals that the first son of House Marion and the second son of House Assemble both seem interested in Elizabeth. However, the Marchioness doesn't find them good enough, so she'll still search for other candidates. She asks if Elizabeth has anyone in mind, and she says no. It's a good thing she did, because that would have been the end of that character. Now the next topic is Jack, who appears to be causing trouble. It turns out the news of him trying to recruit James got to the Marchioness, but little did Jack know that he's already sold out to Phelan. She finds this funny and begins to laugh in a loud manner. However, Elizabeth believes it's because of her father and stepmother that he made such a move, but she can't say that. If she does, her stepmom might end up doing things to harm Jack. Anyway, the Marchioness is about to leave and will keep searching for suitors for Elizabeth. But before she goes, she heads over to Elizabeth, who is terrified at this point. Then she makes it clear that if she falls in love with anyone, there will be trouble. So the poor girl has no other choice but to comply. With that said, Elizabeth now has to go for supper with the family. In the dining hall, the table has been set with food, so the family have their meal in a silent and gloomy environment. However, the doors burst open, shaking up the mood a bit. It's Jack who comes in like a ray of sunshine into the hall. Of course, some people are surprised, and others are disappointed. But Jack wants to join in for dinner since he is a part of the Valentier family after all. Apparently, there are 2 ways to use mana. The first way is to circulate mana through the body to make the user faster, stronger, smarter, and all that. The second way is the nerd approach, where one can apply some formula to mana and give it shape. This allows them to use all manner of spells. This is why mana users are divided into swordsmen and magicians, and Jack here falls under the swordsman category. Speaking of Jack, a few minutes earlier he finished creating his second circle as a swordsman. Ron has a very surprised expression since it took him 2 months to become a second circle. Normally it would take 4 months to achieve this, so doing it in 2 months is actually impressive. But still, it's nothing compared to doing it in just 5 hours. Jack asks for the time, and it's 5:48 in the afternoon. Jack is shocked by how much time has passed. Then his stomach begins to growl, just in time since it's time for dinner. Rather than having his usual steak, he wants to try something different. He figures that it's also dinner time in the main building, so he makes up his mind to crash the party. At the same time, he also wants to reveal he'll be leaving for the academy on the next day. So we're back at the dinner hall, and the only sound that can be heard is Jack's chewing. He's currently having the time of his life seeing how they feast in the main building. He also finds the food nice, but not as good as Ron's. After this comment, the Marchioness is seething with rage while Phelan gets some bad memories. Just like that, Jack is full. However, the Marquis figures that he must have paid a visit because he has something to say. And this is exactly why he came. Because who would want to have dinner in such a gloomy place? At this point, the Marquis figures that Jack has lost his mind, but his serious face is making things more gloomier. As the tension between Jack and his father rises, Elizabeth, who is nervous to death, wishes to talk with her brother outside. However, that won't be necessary because the Marquis still wants to hear him out. So, with a grin that'll make someone know something's up, Jack informs his father that he'll be heading back to the academy the next day, while the Marchioness is thinking of 1,000 ways to end Jack. After the announcement, the Marquis just goes, "Okay, whatever." However, Jack's aim wasn't to ask for permission. Now that's settled, Jack gets up and is glad his father is letting him go hassle-free. But before he leaves, he checks up on his brother, Phelan, who has been scarred for life. It turns out he's now scared of any liquid and can't even drink them. But still, Jack figures he's thirsty. Since he's part of the family, Jack actually feels a bit sorry for his brother, even though he was Phelan's punching bag at one point. So, as the caring younger brother he is, Jack pours some wine on the table to offer some to his brother. However, as the wine splashes on the table, Phelan begins to tweak out and then falls to the ground. The Marchioness is outraged by Jack's behavior and loses it. But Jack begins to leave once the wild animal gets loose since he's done what he needed to do. Now the atmosphere is tense, but the Marchioness is determined to have her revenge on Jack. However, he looks forward to what she'll bring to the table. From his response, she begins to turn into a nuclear weapon. A couple of maids are amazed by Jack's attitude, but then they decide to clean up before the nuke goes off. After the Marchioness's declaration of war, nothing happened to Jack overnight. The only wrath he faced was from his sister, who was very much upset about that incident. When that is done, Jack heads to the academy in a carriage arrangement that he finds similar to something on Craigslist, although the cushions were padded pretty nicely this time around. But anyway, he takes a look at one of the guards following him. His name is Raisin, and is a 6th Circle Knight who's in charge of the caravan. From the way he's staring at Jack, you can tell he's been paid to take care of some business. It turns out Elizabeth also came along to keep an eye on her younger brother and wants to go with him, but Jack believes he'll be fine. Her instincts believe their stepmother is up to something, so she wants to come along, but Jack insists that there's no need for it. Besides, he's confident that he's not dying anytime soon. Even with that, Elizabeth wants to follow along, but Jack instructs her to go back. With that, she finally listens and turns around. Ron is also worried since things aren't so bright at home. Jack can tell that Elizabeth and Ron are both worried, but everything will be all right. So he reminds Ron of the promise they made and something about tonight. Of course, Ron remembers this. In the end, Jack also leaves Elizabeth in his care and prompts him to go to her. So with that, Ron heads back as well. Now everything has been set. It turns out Ron will catch up later, and he's going to watch the mystery event that will happen later. Then Jack takes a nap, and he figures it's the weather that's making him so drowsy. He dozes off, but now the question is, what does Scarface plan to do? The journey goes on until nightfall. Jack finally wakes up after no one bothered to wake him. He steps out of the carriage, and it appears they're camping out. Jack then spots his one and only chickling. No words are said between them, however, Jack returns a smile. It seems Jack's aware of the path James has taken, and there's nothing he can do about his choice. He just has to use "it is what it is." But the next thing you know, there's a crowd of soldiers before Jack. He seems to have caught up with what's going to happen. But anyway, Raisin explains what's going to happen. Throughout the journey to the academy, they're going to be camping out. And what Scarface has in mind is that they're going to crush Jack's limbs at each stop. Then they'll feed him a potion to heal him. Of course, the person behind this scheme is Jack's stepmother. But another thing they're aware of is that Jack created a mana circle recently, and this point surprises Jack. The reason for pointing this out is that they plan to destroy it. Apparently, destroying someone's mana circle is like a death sentence. Even though it can be recreated, it's extremely rare to find someone who can endure that process. On top of that, breaking someone's mana circle can pretty much cripple the person. Raisin pokes Jack's shoulder with his sheathed sword, and has also heard of his skills from James. Even with that, Raisin believes it won't be enough to get him out of his current situation, and he draws his sword to begin. A few locals notice this, but they leave the nobles to noble things up. However, this feeling reminds Jack of home. He was the mad swordsman, and his past experience is always there, even with how long he's lived in peace. He then calls out to Ron, but there is only silence. It turns out that in Jack's past life, he lived in the woods for 10 years, and that was where he met his master. After she passed away, he came down from the mountains and discovered that House Valentier and the kingdom had been destroyed. And of course, he couldn't be bothered. While Raisin wonders what Jack's yapping about, Jack draws a sword from his cane. The only question that bothered him at that time of his life was what happened to his sister. Since she's a smart and talented individual, the one thing he hoped for her was to find a good husband. And if she did, maybe Jack would have forgiven everything. Raisin begins to laugh at the fact Jack has drawn his measly sword, but Jack begins to talk about revenge, which is a bit confusing. At first, Jack wanted to let the Marquess or Marchioness maybe break an arm or a rib or two, but breaking his mana circle is where Jack draws the line. He also admits that a bit of mana or talent in swordsmanship won't solve everything, but having a ton of it can solve a lot. So, to demonstrate, he gets into the air and begins to recite something for a cool-looking lightning attack. It was at this moment the guards knew it was either Jack or them, so they charge in to attack, but it's already too late. Jack finally rips through all the guards with his attack. James never regretted choosing Phelan, who had many connections, over Jack, who seemed worthless, because it made enough sense to do that. But after witnessing what's currently happening, it was at this moment that he knew he messed up. And that was when his time in the world had come to an end. Jack's sword has shattered after that epic attack, but at least all the guards are now dead. While his body is still surging with mana, he calls Ron to come out. A few bushes begin to rustle, then Ron finally pops out and he's shocked by what he has just witnessed. It turns out what he just saw was one of the first skills from a style Jack mastered in the Transcendent Realm. But Jack didn't bother with explanations since Ron probably wouldn't understand. However, it looked more like a mana attack than a skill to Ron. More importantly, Jack asked for a potion. But before he can finish his request, Jack begins to stagger and falls to the ground. He begins coughing up some blood but says he's alright and asks for a potion. So, as requested, Ron reaches into his jacket and pops one open. Jack drinks it, and he's actually lucky. If Ron never had one of those, Jack would be dead. However, he's still confident he wouldn't have died, because he knows that Ron always carries a potion at hand, and will rather use it on his master than himself. How he knows this is because a similar event happened before, and Ron fed Jack a potion. So Jack decides to tell Ron something since the last time he was busy running away. He thanks Ron for his service, and wonders why it was so hard for him to say. At the same time, he also reveals to Ron that he went back in time, allowing Ron to know the secret of his success. After that confession, Jack sits up. He feels much better than before, so he figures that's some good potion. Then he stands up, walks over to Raisin, who is now dead, and takes his sword. After that, he takes a look at James, who is also dead. It's a shame because Jack planned to have him as an errand boy. With the decision he made, Jack figures a chickling will always be one and never expected much from him either way. But on to the next point. For some reason, Ron wasn't surprised after hearing his master traveled back in time, and Jack wonders if he has any questions like, for instance, what will happen to Elizabeth or the Valentier family. Ron already had an idea that bad things would happen to them, but he never expected they would be wiped out, and he can tell it won't be pretty from Jack's reaction. Jack is also willing to share the details, but the last thing Ron wants to know is dark details about the future. Then he grabs Ron's interest about what would happen to him in the future. He believes he survived and doubts he would die in a violent death. But Jack is the bearer of bad news and tells him that's exactly what he will do in the future. And of course, he's depressed to hear that. So after the discussion, Jack decides to head to the carriage and get some sleep. Meanwhile, Ron investigates the dead guards, starting with shutting the eyes and mouth of one surprised guard's face. He then discovers that all the 25 corpses had their chests pierced, but they weren't stabbed by a sword. So he can't help but wonder how Jack pulled this off. But more importantly, Ron is worried about the kind of future Jack experienced, and if he'll be alright. A while later, Ron goes to wake Jack up. He springs up, and Ron still wonders if he's alright. Even though Jack took the potion, everything is not okay. After hearing that, Ron reveals that he gathered 5 high-quality potions, 63 gold, and 40 shillings from the knights. It's not a surprise they'd have good loot like that since they were supported by House Mantes. However, Jack figures that drinking the health potions won't make him feel any better. Instead, he hands 3 potions to Ron as a repayment for earlier. Ron accepts them, and his investment has just paid off. After that, Jack steps out of the carriage. As for what will happen to the corpses, Jack plans to leave them, and whatever happens will happen. Ron figures that Jack will become a suspect since he's the only one missing. And as for who will suspect, it's the Marquis. But Jack could care less even if he did since his father can't threaten him, and he places the loot in his luggage. Ron believes the Marquis might summon Jack, but Jack says bet. This time, Ron refuses to make another gamble since he might lose again. However, he kneels before Jack and is confident he has a plan. Speaking of plans, no one currently knows where Ron is since he cast an illusion in the main building. This illusion is a deception spell 9th circles can use to create a copy of themselves. And currently, the only people who can recognize it are currently busy in the forest of monsters. But still, he has to be careful. Jack figures that once Ron is found out, the Marquis may interrogate him about what happened on the journey. So the plan is to tell him that everything that happened was Jack's idea. If the Marquis then tries to kill him, Jack gives Ron a message. That message says if either Elizabeth or Ron dies, that will be the end of House Valentier. Now there's a silence between the two of them, but that last part is just for the worst-case scenario. Jack is just hoping that the Marquis will finally act like a proper father to Elizabeth, and is giving him a chance to make the right choice. Now that Jack is heading for the academy, Ron wonders what next if the Marquis calls for him. But fortunately for him, there's a rule at the academy that won't allow anyone to return home unless it concerns the death of a family member or the family head. So with that in mind, Ron decides to head back, although he's a bit disappointed because he wants to accompany Jack. While that would be great, it's not the best move. So Jack pats his shoulder and tells him to be careful of monsters on the way back. This will probably be the last time they'll meet until 4 years are up, so he asks Ron to take care of Elizabeth. After Ron leaves, Jack plans out his journey to the academy. Since it'll take 4 days to travel by road, he wonders how long it might take if he travels through the forest. He then observes that the forest area isn't so rough, so he concludes there's a village nearby. With that, he prepares a horse and struggles to get on it. Of course, one of the challenges of being a midget. Once he gets on, he makes his way through the peaceful scenery that is way more calm than what happened earlier. Plus, he doesn't want to head straight to the academy. What's currently on his mind is searching for his master, Valentine Milrose. It turns out she was the one who made him the person he currently is and gave him the strength to get revenge. She was also the strongest dark magician at one point, and her name was the new definition of fear to everyone. So Jack heads on his way while his heart is racing, and he wonders about it since it's been a while since he experienced that. Eventually, Jack arrives at the town of Arbeloa, the domain of Viscount Arbeloa, who's a vassal of House Assemble. He then arrives at an inn and also spots a few children. From their joyful expressions, he believes that he's found a nice village. Jack then steps into the inn, and it's also a cheerful place. He's then welcomed by a random dog, and from there, he finds a place to sit. Shortly, the innkeeper welcomes him and asks for what he would like. From how jacked she looks and the scars on her face, one would think she's a mercenary. But anyway, Jack pays for a light meal, a drink, and also asks for his sword to be retrieved from where his horse is. But it turns out Jack overpaid for his services, because the lady is fine with just 1 shilling. She offers to bring him some food with a bonus, then Jack chooses milk as a drink since he's obviously underage. However, it seems the lady's cheery attitude is bothering him a bit. Now Jack's order has been made, she heads off to get them. Jack figures that the place is lively, probably because it's a peaceful town to live in. Anyone can tell he's an outsider, but surprisingly, the lady didn't try to cheat him. Although this time of peace was before the war broke out. Shortly, Jack overhears a discussion. It's about a large-scale operation that involves wiping out monsters completely. While the reason for this is unknown, the Thulkan Empire isn't doing anything about it. Plus, this cleanup is a heavy investment involving 20,000 mana users. At the current moment, most of the Ironblood Order, the elite troops of House Valentier, have been assigned to the Forest of Monsters. It turns out the king of the Theslan Kingdom drafted a large number of soldiers from each family and made them go for the monsters in the forest. This forest is at the base of a mountain called the Grand Range, and it's a place full of orcs, goblins, elves, and all other kinds of fantasy creatures. Apparently, they use various remains of these monsters for armor, potions, and all other kinds of things, including things for beauty and even turning elves into pets. Of course, taking over a neutral area that isn't under threat is just people being greedy. However, Jack is aware that this subjugation is guaranteed to fail. It turns out the Ironblood Order lost a third of their knights after this failed expedition, and was a complete failure. As a result of this, the king lost the support of both the people and the aristocrats. Jack recalls that this canon event made the kingdom to start dividing. Then a civil war breaks out. Before Jack can finish his train of thought, someone slams his cup on the table. He seems to be on the right path of how incompetent the king is. He continues his rant, but another man stops him from saying anything more because the price for speaking against the king is death. It appears our random guy had rank a bit too much, which led to his outburst. Jack commends the dude's courage for speaking against the king, since that's a one-way ticket to losing your head. Then a conversation piques his interest. It's about the youngest son of the Marquis, aka himself. The rumors of him using dark magic has also spread to this village as well, along with him being sent to jail. While Jack listens to this, they continue to laugh at and insult him. Then the innkeeper comes over with Jack's meal, wondering what he thinks is funny. He's confused by what she's talking about, then finds out he was smiling without knowing. The lady then takes a seat since she doesn't have much to do. Jack reveals what he overheard about the last son of the Marquis being an idiot, and he was just listening to it. Normally, most people draw conclusions based on rumors of things they haven't seen for themselves. But as for Our Lady, she prefers to see things firsthand. However, Jack informs her that those rumors can be true sometimes. After that, Jack takes a slice of pie. He tries it and thinks it's good, but not up to Ron level of good. However, based on the lady's opinion, seeing how handsome the youngest son of the Marquis is compared to the rumors, she doesn't believe these ones about Jack. After hearing that, Jack realizes something. From the lady's scars, muscular build, and regular customers who are mercenaries, he figures that she's the branch manager of an adventurer's guild. She's shocked after hearing this, but it seems Jack is right. He didn't just make a lucky guess. Apparently, each village has its mercenaries who are looking for work. They undertake a variety of jobs ranging from fighting monsters all the way to finding lost cats. And most times they set up their guild close to an inn. So with that, Jack is curious why an adventurer's guild branch manager is running an inn. But this is the lady's full-time job. Since work is hard to find, she has to hustle one way or another. The inn is actually a lodging facility that is run by the Adventurers Guild. So Jack commends the lady for thinking of this. In House Volantier, Jack is known as that one useless child. But here, he's just another topic for the mercenaries to gossip about. So he wonders how a guild branch manager of all people could notice him in a remote area. Then it hits him. He recalls the time when he just found the village. When he arrived, the guard stopped him to do the usual security checks, but he showed the crest of his family, which is his get-out-of-jail-free card. The guard gets shocked after seeing this and begs for forgiveness for not recognizing Jack. Then they granted him a smooth entry. Jack realizes that the guards must have told the guild manager about him. While that's regarded as dangerous, she was kind to him. Not only that, she also heard all those rumors about him, but she still treated him like a normal human being, unlike his brother or the knights at home. After the lady thanks him, she puts out her hand for a handshake and introduces herself as Jane Arbeloa. Jack shakes her hand, but after hearing her name and the name of the domain, he figures she's from a noble family. It turns out she's the third child of the family, and her oldest brother is the lord of the domain. Normally, working with mercenaries is a job for commoners, but Jack is fascinated that a noble is doing it. Nobles usually have their daughters marry someone at a young age, but that wasn't Jane's case. She enjoyed her current job, plus no one in her family wanted her to be sold off. Jack is fascinated after hearing that, however. He wishes his own family was like Jane's. After that, Jane calls her dog, Arnold, and after he leaps at her, she wonders what the son of a Marquis is doing alone at Arbeloa. Jack doesn't believe he needs guards, and this response shocks Jane. After hearing that, she figures that he's nothing like the rumors she heard. But anyway, since Jack has a long journey to make, he wants to hire protection. As for how many people he'll hire, he needs 5 people and they'll have to be experienced with camping out and cooking. Then for the payment, Jack plans to pay 2 gold per person in advance, and an extra 3 for each person when they arrive at the destination. After hearing that, Jane's face lights up like it's Christmas. Jack figures it would take 30 shillings per person to guard a merchant. As for how the currency works, 100 pennies equal 1 shilling, and 100 shillings equal 1 gold. With this fact, the Adventurers Guild has just made serious bank right now. However, Jack still has to pay for food and equipment, so he wants to keep the total bill of that within 3 gold and asks for a carriage and horses as well. Seeing that she's just hit a cash cow, Jane hands Jack his room key while she goes to handpick the finest warriors the guild has. After that, Jack figures she's probably the reason why the whole village is so safe. Jack finally arrives at his room, and the first thing he does is to lie on his bed since he's exhausted. He plans to take a shower first, but he's already fallen asleep. Later on, Jack has a dream. In it, he's in some kind of cave. He's with his master who pities him and asks Jack if he wants to remain powerless. And obviously, Jack is fed up with being weak. He wants to change this about himself. So with that response, Valentine puts her hands around Jack and finally decided to become Jack's master. After that, Jack suddenly wakes up with tears running down his face. It's a new day at Arbeloa and Jane bursts into Jack's room full of sunshine. Then there's Arnold the dog who leaps at him and begins to lick his face. After that wake-up call, Jack prepares for his journey. He heads downstairs and Jane can tell he had a bit of a tough time sleeping. But anyway, she has prepared a high-quality carriage and gathered the top-level soldiers to accompany him. But out of these people, Jack notices a few of them who were making fun of him the previous day, and they are beginning to regret their actions. One of the mercenaries introduces himself. His name is John Doe and is the leader of the Fire Ant mercenaries. Jack hears this and wonders what kind of a person would have such a basic placeholder name. There's no way he believes that's the dude's real name, but he shakes him either way. They'll be heading towards Mount Boulder, and since there's hardly anything there apart from a few villages, the prediction is that they'll be camping around 2 times. John explains that a couple of the soldiers were cooks and they are experienced with camping. But Jack is bored of the details and figures he won't have to do anything. With that plan, he hands John his suitcase and they head on their way. Before Jack leaves through the door, he tells Jane that John seems like an interesting guy for someone who's using a default name. While Jack's body may have changed, his senses and eyes are still the same. A 9th circle like Ron is pretty rare, and it makes sense for him to hide his identity and power. But then there's John who's an 8th circle soldier, and he's holding back for some reason. Then again, Jack did ask for a veteran, so he can't complain. Anyway, Jack believes he'll meet Jane again, and she on the other hand wants to have some beer the next time they meet. That might be possible as long as she's the one taking the bill. So with that, Jack finally leaves the inn. So the convoy begins the journey with the shiny, brand new carriage. Jack is enjoying the ride and is relaxing on top of it. After having that time to rest, he's now in a better condition compared to the previous day. Then he notices John staring and wonders what the deal is. However, he puts that aside and calls a different mercenary. Jack asks if he knows who he's escorting, but the dude has as much confidence as your typical introvert. The only thing he knows is that Jack is the son of some noble, and he seems to be traveling the world. After that, Jack wants to ask a question. He searches through his vest and tosses him an item. It's the seal of a noble family. It seems the soldier has an idea of it but doesn't exactly know what it is. So Jack reveals that the crest belongs to House Valentier, and they'll soon be wiped out of existence. After that's been said, the atmosphere becomes pretty awkward. Jack also talks about the idiot child of the family, the same one who was also sent to jail. At this point, the mercenary has finally realized who Jack is from the obvious hints. After Jack was released from prison, he found out the rumors of him using dark magic. At this point, the soldier is regretting everything that led him to this moment. However, Jack also claims to know a bit of dark magic. After all, his master was the goat of dark magic. But seeing who Jack's dealing with, his fist would probably be enough. Next, he calls out the dude's friend. On that previous day, he kept his friend quiet when he spoke about the king, but didn't do anything when he talked about Jack. Everyone seems shocked to find out Jack is the last child of House Valentier except Mr. John Doe. So Jack figures that the branch manager only informed him and not the others. But anyway, they'll be spending a while with each other, so those mercenaries better hope Jack doesn't switch things up with them. One time skip later, it's night and the camp has been set up. With how Jack has been acting so far, the mercenaries figure that rumors are just rumors. Jack doesn't act like your default noble. He does some of his things by himself and even washed his own dishes after the meal. Speaking of meals, Jack feels sorry for Jane because the food he had at the camp was better than hers. At this point, he wants to hire them as his personal chefs. Also, he feels a bit sorry for Ron as well, who was left behind. But anyway, doing the dishes was Jack's way of expressing gratitude for the meal. Now for the next matter, they're going to draw names for who gets the night watch. Of course, Jack doesn't want his name in the mix since man takes his sleep seriously. After that's been sorted, the next thing is story time. Jack goes first, and he asks the others how many dragons they believe exist in the world. They believe that the founder of the kingdom sent them to extinction centuries ago. This is the national myth, and how it goes is that the founder of the Thessalon kingdom, King Julius Thessalon, and his two companions defeated all the dragons that took over the western continent and founded the Thessalon Empire. However, this is one of those poorly aged things. The Thessalon Empire became Thessalon Kingdom and became subjected to the Thulcaean Empire. Well, that's what everyone knows. But Jack reveals there are 2 Lord Dragons in the Dark Sea, a hatchling that belongs to the Imperial family, 5 in the Forest of Monsters, and 8 who wander around in a polymorphed state, making that 16 in total on the continent. Of course, Jack doesn't blame them if they don't believe him since they're pretty much mythical creatures. Jack goes on with what might be a story. It turns out the dragons can't interfere with humans, since they're bound by an oath. This makes John wonder if King Julius didn't kill all the dragons. So Jack explains that he didn't actually kill them, but made a deal with them. On top of that, it was his 2 companions who did all the work. So for the next question, Mr. Placeholder Name wonders what the dragons are currently doing. Jack explains that the Western Continent and Eastern Continent are separated thanks to the Dark Sea, and the Dragon Lords have always guarded the border of that sea for generations. While the Dark Sea's origins are unknown, it was created to divide the 2 continents, and the Dragon Lords have always passed on their duty to their offspring. But even with that, Jack's still curious to see what the Eastern Continent's like. After hearing that story, there's a silence in the camp. Then the mercenaries suddenly burst into laughter. One of them commends Jack's talent for storytelling and figures he's just a guy who's just lonely. But oh well, Jack never expected them to believe him anyway. Either way, it doesn't matter if they believe Jack's story. He wants to have a bath, so he heads to the carriage to grab a lantern. A soldier offers to stand guard, but that won't be necessary. So with that, Jack goes to have a soak. The mercenaries don't believe all the things he said, so Jack wonders why he keeps telling people. Man's already aware of his main character energy, and he knows it's boring to keep his powers a secret. While that's good, what's bothering Jack is John Doe. He figures he might be a spy from the Thulcaean Kingdom. The same thing goes for the branch manager, Jane. She's also suspicious as well. Jack asked her to bring a mercenary to protect him, and she brought an 8th Circle mana user who was using a fake name. Speaking of 8th Circles, that's the same level as the Ironblood Order's commander at the moment. Then someone with a rare talent like that, and the leader of some unknown mercenary group just fell into Jack's hands. But it's possible John has his reasons. Anyway, before he makes any other moves, Jack places his hand on his chest and it begins to glow. It turns out that while he was in the carriage, he had been gradually recovering from his previous fight. When he's done with that, Jack figures he'll soon be arriving to meet with his master. As he gets out of the pool, he's already decided to abandon John if he shows any sign of being a Thulcaean spy. He also figures that there's no other way around the matter and decides to ask him directly. Jack arrives back at the campsite. However, he's wielding a sword and mentions the fact something has been bothering him. Since John is clueless about what it could be, Jack points his sword and clearly states that John's the problem. He's curious why an 8th Circle user like him is working as a mercenary. Since the place Jack's heading to is important, he has no intention of letting someone like him come along. A soldier is shocked that their commander is an 8th Circle. Before he can ask what's going on, John silences him. So John says what about it? But since Jack shared an interesting story earlier, he wants to hear John's explanation. And if he refuses, Jack will gladly end him, even though he's a 2nd Circle. Then he throws the same question to the random mercenary who's terrified. Since John may be a spy, Jack believes Jane could be a suspect, even though she offered to have a beer with him next time. But now John gets serious. He wonders why Jack would bring up Jane out of nowhere, so Jack threatens to end Jane as well while he makes the face of a serial killer. After saying that, Jack has managed to provoke John quite a bit. However, his mana circle won't give way. Whether he's being cautious or hesitant, one thing Jack knows is that John's lucky. He was actually prepared to slice him in half the moment he started his mana circle. Now he has a chance to stay alive. Jack gives him 1 minute to make the right decision. In a flashback at Jane's inn, Jane talks with John about Jack. She figures that he's nothing like the rumors. And on top of that, she looked into his eyes and it felt like he was holding back a lot. Then she revealed that Jack wanted to recruit some soldiers, so she asked John to find out more info about him. With how Jack seems, he just might be the one who would change their lives. One thing John learned is that Jack is nowhere near what he heard from the rumors. While Jack's waiting for an answer, John actually feels like he's in trouble. It almost feels like he's a herbivore being chased by a lion, and the only thing his instincts are saying is that Jack's a dangerous person. Even though John's in trouble, he still finds everything pretty odd. First up, how did Jack know he's an 8th Circle user? He considers if Jane might have given him a hint. but there's no way she did that since she's someone he trusts. Plus, she would have given him the heads up if she did. Anyway, the clock is ticking, and John currently has 40 seconds left to answer. However, the question is if Jack can currently kill an 8th circle. But still, with how menacing Jack's eyes look, John begins to wonder if he's even a child at all. John contemplates telling Jack the truth to avoid any trouble, while the other soldiers are very confused and he thinks about what to do next. At this point, it almost feels like he's on the edge of a cliff, and his life as a mercenary flashed before his eyes. Either way, he considers himself lucky so far, so he now wants to see how far his luck will carry him and trust his instincts. While he has that internal monologue, the time is up and Jack prepares to kill the mercenary. Then John talks about Jane, which surprises Jack. It seems she's facing some kind of situation, so Jack stands down to listen to what John has to say. John Doe's story is a love story. He was a commoner guy, and Jane was a noble girl. When John was a 7th circle user, he met Jane. By that time, she was 19, and the both of them fell in love at first sight. And ever since then, they've been in a relationship. This explains why Jane wasn't married. But still, commoner or not, an 8th circle is usually respected in some way. But here's John, who's working as a mercenary, and Jack doesn't see anything wrong with him. Of course, after hearing this story, the rest of the mercenaries are shocked by the fact he's seeing the branch manager. Judging from Jane's character, Jack figures that she might come from a family of nobles who don't care about power. So Jane is the Adventurers Guild branch manager of a small domain and John's a mercenary. Putting things together, Jack finally figures that John took on the job to see if he could get some kind of benefit. However, he could be making all of this up. So Jack uses an ability to see through him. He reminds him of the story he told earlier and asks why the Thulkan Empire would have a dragon hatchling with them. But John has zero idea of what he's talking about. Normally, a master is someone who has 10 mana circles in their heart. However, there's a secret higher level that exists. The people of this rank are called Transcendents, and they use the power of the soul instead of mana. Jack reveals that in 2 years, Hankies Beckerman, the guard of the Imperial family, will reach this level and become the strongest swordsman in the Empire. It's been a long while since a Transcendent existed. However, this guard won't get there on his own. He'll end up replacing half of his bones and blood with a dragon's, making him half human, half dragon. As a result of this insane act, he'll end up becoming a hybrid. While John doesn't see what the story has to do with anything, Jack reveals that the Thulkans currently have one dragon. Even if they're almost immortal, they can only perform so many experiments on one of them. So, the Imperial family sent people to other countries to gather information and check if a dragon existed there. After all that, John begins to laugh. He finds all that Jack said to be straight out of some novel. If he probably told this to the other mercenaries, they might just believe him. But after seeing John's reaction, Jack figures he's not a spy and now trusts him. Anyway, he passes by and he hopes the wedding between Jane and John actually happens. Just as he passes, Jack notices something that makes him go from 0 to 100 real quick and point his sword at the back of John's head. It appears John was about to draw his sword as well. Since Jack was the one who was suspicious of John first, he's letting the soldier live. He grabs his cloak and warns him about having any form of killing intent. If he does sense it again, Jack promises to nuke him out of reality. The rest of the soldiers who are panicked try to calm the situation. However, it's unfortunate because Jack thought he was finally coming to an understanding. But I guess that's just the relationship between an employer and employee. Later on in the night, Jack is asleep. However, the mercenaries are confused about what's happening. They're shocked to find out John's an 8th circle user. Some years ago, John revealed that he was a 4th circle user. While this discovery is upsetting, he probably has his reasons since he hid it after all the years they worked together. But anyway, now they know they have an 8th circle user on the group. One soldier figures that they just might become the best mercenary group on the continent, and John will become the king of mercenaries. However, not just anyone can reach that title. Plus, there are at least 4 mercenaries who are known to be masters, so he's not sure about this soldier's claim. Since everything Jack said was true, a different soldier forgives John for what he did, because everyone has their reasons for doing things. But he asks why John didn't react the time Jack had his sword at his neck. It turns out that moment was so terrifying that John's hands are still shaking because of it. At that moment, he was standing on the verge of life and death. Plus, there's no way he can tell the dude he nearly ruined his pants. Just like Jane said, Jack looks like an interesting child, but he's also pretty dangerous. The fight for the throne in the Thulkan Empire is already bad enough, and now he's hearing about spies and dragons. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Anyway, John decides to look into this. A few days later, the crew's still on the journey. Jack wants to tell another one of his famous stories. This one's about the Orc Lord in the Forest of Monsters. The other mercenaries don't have much info about this fact. The only thing they've heard is that the dude's as strong as a 9th circle user. However, according to Jack, he's actually a 10th circle user. Of course, John's shocked to discover this. But anyway, Jack wants to talk about the past. Around 23 years ago, he and the Harpy Lord were a thing. Normally, orcs and harpies are their own #1 haters, and they start wars with each other pretty often. These two species are called the second tier of the Forest of Monsters, aka Defenders of the Forest. The only reason they're given these nicknames is because they're strong. Since they're enemies, it wouldn't make much sense for the Orc and Harpy Lord to be lovers. But it turns out they didn't hate each other when Darkex became the Orc Lord. However, the problem began 5 years later when everyone found out about the relationship between Darkex and the Harpy Lord. Even though humans, orcs, and harpies are different species, the desire for power still remains the same. Groups within the orcs and harpies wanted to overthrow their lords, so they began to plot against each other. However, all the plans failed and the two lords are still there. After everything was settled, Darkex and the Harpy Lord, Vilea, saw that their love could never be, and they chose the prosperity of their race over it. Whether that information is true is left to be seen, but one thing John knows is that the orcs and harpies are definitely more dangerous compared to the past. They even ended up stealing each other's skills. The harpies had learned the fighting prowess of orcs, while the orcs learned the power of the elements from the harpies. And the ones who caused this were Darkex and Vilea. So because of this, the two races went to war with each other, and also became the two biggest races of the forest. As a heads up, Jack tells John to explain this story if he ever ends up getting captured by one of them, and he's sure they won't be in a hurry to kill him. On the other hand, John doesn't even know if it's true, so he decides to pretend like it is. After hearing such a long story, Jack has some beef jerky, courtesy of Jane. Meanwhile, back at House Valentier, the Marquis learns that all the soldiers guarding Jack have been sent to the afterlife. Detectives believe that they were attacked with some advanced magic. Marquis Valentier is surprised something like this happened, and the question is, who did it? He calls the person who broke the news, Gonzalez, and mentions that he said nothing about Jack. Gonzalez believes he might have escaped since his corpse wasn't there. So after hearing that, the Marquis figures that something is definitely up and gives the dude authority to investigate. So with that, Gonzalez heads out of the room, and the Marquis figures that Jack is actually more useful than he thought. Jack has finally reached Mount Boulder, so he pays up for his services. John finds the bag to be a bit heavy, so he looks inside and discovers that Jack overpaid. However, Jack doesn't need all that excess cash on him and decided to hand it out as a bonus. It could be for then escorting him through the journey, or as a way to apologize for suspecting John, or probably both. Either way, Jack decides to part ways now and bids them farewell. However, the mercenaries remain there. This confuses Jack since telling someone bye means they're leaving. It turns out John has something to say, so he says that being a mercenary isn't so bad. Even though he doesn't know the details, he knows enough to say that. As we all know, Jack's the youngest son of the Marquis and doesn't have anyone to support him. And John is familiar with what happens to people like him. So Jack figures that John is suggesting the mercenary job for him. It doesn't seem like a bad offer since it's a job that will allow Jack to live comfortably, as long as he takes the safer jobs. On a different note, while the other mercenaries may not have been aware, Jack could have killed John on that night if he wanted. John is aware of this fact. But still, it's a shame since Jack's very aware of his talent. In a world that's always obsessed with fighting, John has been hiding his power from his colleagues. But he takes the blame for that incident. In the end, Jack thanks him for the offer, but he's going to forget about it. Then he whispers a secret to John. He tells him that something big is going to happen in the Western continent, and he should hide when it happens. The instructions seem confusing, but Jack promises him it'll be worth it when the time comes. In addition, Jack tells him that he shouldn't bother with the matter. Even though money is important, one's life is even more valuable. So with that, John agrees to do this. That said, Jack heads on his way through some bushes. But before he leaves, John wants to know his name even though he knows who he is. So Jack introduces himself using only his first name, and then he asks for John's real name. After a bit of hesitation, we finally learn that his real name is Dynastismo. With a name like that, I don't blame him for hiding it. Now they know each other's names. Who knows if fate will let them meet again? From there, Jack travels solo. He gets through the mountain using a lot of jumping and parkouring. A few more jumps later, he finally arrives in front of some cave. He creates a mana ball to use as a light and goes into the cave, probably searching for diamonds. But he finds a dead end at the cave. It turns out his master is currently beyond the wall, and he got to the cave in the past by pure coincidence. During that time, all he wanted to do was escape his family. Jack gets out a bottle of some magic water and sprays it on the wall. Then he draws his sword and grips the blade so hard that he begins to bleed as a small price. Back then, Jack discovered the cave when he was 17 years old. And that time, he was just a total coward and wanted to kill himself. Ron had also died, so the only thing he could do was to run. After some hesitation, he couldn't end himself and then began to cry. As he cried, some blood from his slightly cut throat dropped onto the stone wall, and a secret passage was discovered. At that time, discovering it was like some kind of miracle, but now, he already knows that song and dance and has opened up the passage. He heads through the dark passage, goes through some stairs, and ties up his wound. He's also feeling slightly nervous about this since it's been decades he met his master. But now he's finally here. He's at some shady-looking cave, then he walks forward and takes a knee. It's been so long since he's seen his master, who's currently a mini clone of Tatsumaki from One Punch Man wrapped in chains. Normally, every living thing, no matter what they are, has to grow old and die, and this obviously includes Jack's master. However, she used a spell to separate her soul from her body, but they are still connected. So technically, she's been dead for 400 years minimum. But now, the problem is that the chains that link her body and soul are about to break. In Jack's past, she lived for 10 more years after this. But now he gets an extra 3 years added to that. Anyway, she seems to be talking through some form of telepathy and points out the fact Jack called her master. She wants to know who's speaking, but Jack tells her to guess. Unfortunately, she ain't playing no games and is annoyed by Jack's smug attitude. But either way, Jack has missed his master. But she's fascinated by this fact of the student she doesn't know. So she wonders if he's aware of her identity. Of course, there's no way Jack could forget someone like her after all the good times he had with her. But currently, he's the only one who remembers them. So Jack mentions that her name's Valentine Milrose and introduces himself as her student who came from the future. While that story may sound interesting, Valentine doesn't like storytellers. As for why, Jack answers that it's because they alter the truth thanks to having different perspectives and exaggerations. So with that potential to become a storyteller, Valentine asks what she would say as a character in the story, and Jack gets that she'd want him to go away. Jack may have talent as a story writer, but he's also about to be disappointed in his master. Once again, she says she's not Jack's master, but that response is exactly what he expects from her. Now, since he has no other choice, he draws his sword and points it at Valentine. At the same time, he asks his master to forgive him for this rash action. Jack then charges up his sword. Valentine sees this and realizes that he's using soul aura. Since Jack's action may be rude, he promises to take a beating once the situation has been sorted. He intends to destroy his master's chains, and is also aware that breaking them will cause the place to collapse. So he proceeds anyway since it's something he must do. It turns out the person who chained Valentine was Julius Theslin. He promised to free her one day, but man took his time to search for that milk. Several decades passed by until Valentine finally realized he was not coming back. But now, Jack's the person who's going to free her. He slashes the chains made from dragon bones like an overpowered Virgil, and the chains snap. After that, he catches his master who's falling from the air. Unlike Julius, Jack isn't going to randomly abandon her, and he's determined to prove it. After that short reunion, the place begins to crumble. While the boulders are falling, Jack pulls a Gandalf "You Shall Not Pass" move called Mountain. It turns out it's one of the 4 fundamental moves: wind, forest, fire, and mountain. He then stabs his sword into the ground, and since Mountain is a defensive move, all the boulders get deflected from him. Then a glint of light before a massive explosion happens. After seeing this, Valentine wonders who on earth Jack is. But just like he answered earlier, he's her student, then Jack lets go of his sword. What's surprising is that someone as young as Jack learned to use soul aura, but that's possible since he got stronger in the future. From there, Jack wants to explore the world with his master for the next 13 years. With that said, Valentine places her little bitty hands on Jack's face. This is how she finds out if someone's telling the truth, but who knows how that works. After a while, she finds out that he's actually telling the truth about the time travel thing. Now that she finally believes him, Jack collapses out of exhaustion. She then takes a seat on Jack's shoulder and points out the fact that forcing a relationship is pretty rude. However, this is one that Jack believes has to be, so he just went for it. Even though he's in so much pain, he keeps replying since he's Valentine's student after all. Then Jack finally introduces himself and hopes to get along with his master in his current life as well. 5 days later, both of them are in the town of Azenblay. However, all through the 5 days, Valentine managed to not say a single word. It seems she's been organizing her thoughts for the whole ride. Then she speaks for the first time in days. She thought that Jack could be a descendant of Theslin since it's impossible to control souls at such a young age. But it turns out he isn't one. She then makes a statement about the power of souls, then gives Jack a side-eye, expecting him to complete her sentence. Jack can remember from his past life that if he doesn't comply, she'll go Muhammad Ali mode on him. So he says that even out of the Mana Masters, only a few people can use the soul power thing. Luckily for him, that's the correct thing to say. On another note, she also noticed the insane number of people he killed in his soul. However, Jack laughs after hearing that. If he eventually decides to talk about his past life, she'll probably stay quiet for another 5 days. With the amount of people he's killed, she's sure that at this point, it's more than her kill count. Now on to another topic. Valentine wonders why Jack received a once-in-a-lifetime chance of being able to relive his life. From this, Jack figures she has been thinking about his time travel thing. After thinking about his past for a while, he has no idea why. This answer leaves his master disappointed, but it makes sense since he didn't turn back time himself. He figures that if someone else did it, they would have a reason, and is sure they'll meet him one day. If they don't, he'll just have to keep living life. But more importantly, he wants to spend more time with his master. While Jack seems to have a talent for flattery, his next plan is to recruit people to his team since he'll need some help. There are times when it would have been nice, like when the guards tried to attack him, or when he broke his master out of the cave prison. Speaking of that rescue, he felt pretty sick afterward, so he secretly drank 2 high-quality potions and was sick for 5 days. So after those kinds of moments, he'll need some sidekicks to protect him. But anyway, Jack decides to do some shopping, starting with getting a new sword. But a random person who seemed to be in a hurry bumps into him. The girl falls to the ground along with her basket of flowers. She apologizes while Jack offers to help her up. Then Jack finally notices who the person is. While the girl scrambles to pick up her flowers, Jack has just found a perfect member for his crew. So Jack goes straight to recruiting her. Obviously, the girl is shocked after being offered to join a team from nowhere. He also hands her a bag. When she opens it, it's full of gold, and this amount of cash shocks her. She rejects it because it's too much for her. Although, a single shilling is all that she needs. So Jack gives that to her, and the girl hands him the entire basket of flowers. With that, she rushes off bidding him farewell, but then she pauses and bows before finally leaving. She's a perfect candidate for Jack's team, however, Valentine can tell she's a vampire. It turns out even Jack didn't know this and is surprised to hear that info. He wasn't recruiting her because she's a vampire, but he figured she had the potential to become a 10th circle user. So after that, Jack still has a long way left to improve, and Valentine's there to teach him everything. Concerning the girl earlier, she seems familiar to Valentine. She recalls a time when she saw the same girl in a forest, and this coincidence is crazy. So Valentine lets Jack know that she'd like to visit someone after he gets his sword. Random fact time. Vampires were the only creatures that stood a chance against dragons. Jack searches for a sword while the seller talks endlessly about why his choice might be the one, but we digress. Anyway, back to the random fact about vampires and dragons. Around 10 years ago, the vampires waged a war against the dragons to escape the forest of monsters. As you'd expect, the dragons won, however. A handful of vampires used the opportunity to escape the forest. So that would mean the girl Jack met earlier might be a child of one of those vampires. But anyway, he doesn't really care who she is. He picks a sword, and the saleswoman goes on the usual talk. But Jack's had enough at this point, so he picks the sword and doesn't care if it was the same one King Arthur used to shave his nose hair or something. After paying for the sword, Jack has decided what he'll do about his first underling. When they leave the shop, Valentine questions if he really has to do this since she doesn't know much about the current times. Jack understands her worry, but he believes that children are innocent. With that response, Valentine wonders if he's just saying that to justify his decision. Hopefully that's not Jack's intention. However, Jack understands why his master's like this. It turns out that 400 years ago, she, the dragons, and all the rulers of different creatures made a promise to not interfere with humans. So after that, all the creatures moved to the forest of monsters. With how much time has passed, all the rulers who made that promise have all died, and the creatures were technically free from that promise. But there was one problem. The dragons wouldn't let them leave the forest. Since they have lived for more than 2,000 years, the promise still stands for them. They also can't escape as well, so they made sure that no other creature escaped the forest. While Valentine's judgment was right, all the dragons needed to be killed, unfortunately. The old Jack had discovered this during the war, and then he went ahead and wiped out the dragon race. A while later, Valentine spots the girl who seems to be doing some shopping. After seeing his master's demeanor, Jack holds her hand and says she doesn't need to feel guilty. Even though he doesn't know everything about the situation, he knows enough. After all, he's still Valentine's student. With that said, she finally lets Jack do what he wants. But some friendly advice for Jack is not to let the girl drink his blood. Jack gets confused and wonders why his master would say that. Anyway, the girl finishes her shopping and hurries away. Since she's still a child, Jack figures that she has to eat things good for kids. Meanwhile, deficiency-inflicted vampire girl recalls the time Jack tried to recruit her. She finds it ridiculous that he was talking to some kind of doll, and the fact he tried to recruit her. But still, it's been ages since anyone has spoken to her in such a polite manner. She's also carrying some orc blood to give to her bedridden mother. When she was young, the girl's mom told her not to drink human blood. Other than the one her uncle gave her, she wasn't allowed to drink any other blood. She finally arrives home and wonders if he's going to show up again. When she arrives, she wonders if her mom is sleeping, so she calls to her as she comes up the stairs. The mom finally answers and says they have a guest. The girl searches around for the person, then there's a Jack jump scare. She's surprised that he managed to find the house and falls over. Then Valentine asks the other vampire to sit up, and she complies. Even with how sickly she looks, Valentine can recognize the lady and wonders why she's bedridden. And apparently, the vampire lady's name is Vivienne de Royale, a noble vampire. Later on, Jack and the vampire girl are outside the house. The girl, whose name we still don't know, plays with some birds while Jack watches. He then takes a look at the room window above. Even though he's keeping track of things with his mana, he really hopes nothing goes wrong. Back in the bedroom, Vivienne wonders who the doll beside her is. After a subtle reminder, Vivienne finally realizes that the person is Valentine Milrose, the very same person who threw her kind into the forest of monsters. Before Vivienne can say any other thing, the weakness kicks in and she begins to cough and tremble. When she recovers, she points out that Valentine's now a doll. But this form is a curse, and Valentine only gets one night as a human out of an entire month. More importantly, she wants to know what a vampire is doing outside the forest of monsters. From her sickly and cracked-up appearance, it's obvious Vivienne hasn't drunk blood for a long time, so Valentine wonders why. From that question, the vampire lady wonders if she's pitying her. While there's no answer to that, a lot of time has passed. In the good old days, Valentine was pretty strong, and it was almost impossible to reach her. However, Vivienne doesn't hate her for the decision. In fact, if they weren't drafted, the humans would have found a way to eliminate all of them. Now to answer Valentine's question. In the Forest of Monsters, there are 5 tyrants and 2 lords who control them from the shadows. In the past, vampires tried to escape from their rule by escaping the forest. By that time, the vampire girl, whose name is revealed to be Charlotte, was still a baby. However, the escape attempt failed, and the vampires were killed by a dragon. Vivienne and Charlotte were the only survivors, but the dragon spared them out of pity. But in exchange for this, the dragon ordered them to stay at Assembly and drink only pig and cow blood. Even though the living conditions were not the best, Vivienne was willing to accept it so she could save her daughter. However, Valentine doesn't approve of this. A vampire with a royal bloodline just waiting for death in a random village. Back outside, Charlotte wonders when the 2 visitors are leaving. It turns out her uncle's coming soon, and she's nervous because he doesn't like visitors. The mention of an uncle piques Jack's interest, so he asks her for more info about him. Charlotte is startled by this and figures that Jack's trying to scam him. But Jack's not a brokey who would do that. He's just bored of waiting outside, so he wants to know. Charlotte eventually agrees and starts with the most important fact. He's rich. Other than that, he's the person who gave her and her mother the house they're staying in, and he brings them food every 3 days. Jack figures the food she's talking about is the cow and pig blood that was mentioned in Vivienne's story. After hearing that, Jack wants to give some info about Charlotte's uncle. But before he can say anything, a random voice surprises Jack. It's from Charlotte's uncle, and he remarks about her new visitor. Of course, Charlotte is delighted to see him. Jack meets with the man, and he on the other hand figures that Jack's from a noble family. However, something is off with this dude. Jack realizes that he's actually a dragon. A short while later, he points out that there are quite a few guests present. Then there's Vivienne, who asks Valentine to call for Charlotte. Once Dragon Man points out the guests present, Valentine talks with Jack through her usual telepathy thing. Jack confirms that he can hear her, and at the same time reveals there's another guest. So, Valentine instructs him to bring Charlotte and the man to the house. The man's a bit confused and wonders about Jack's mumbling. Jack reveals that his master's calling for him, so he leads the way. Besides, the dragon came to watch as Vivienne's about to die, so they make their way up the stairs. Vivienne calls for her daughter, then she is surprised when she spots the Dragon Man. However, he doesn't plan to do anything. After all, Vivienne's about to give her final words, and he doesn't want to interrupt that. After hearing that, Charlotte becomes worried and checks up on her mother. She brings the orc blood that she bought earlier to give to her mother. However, she declines the offer, but appreciates the fact her daughter brought her a birthday present. Vivienne then apologizes since she hasn't been able to do much for her daughter. After hearing that, this makes Charlotte worried. As for Jack, he believes that there's no reason for him and his master to come in the first place. They ran into Charlotte by chance, and Jack was the one who decided to follow her. He believes that's not enough reason for them to remain as she watches her mother die, so he wants to create a reason. He steps forward and asks if Vivienne will entrust her daughter with him. Of course, she's shocked after hearing this. Then Jack takes her hand, and to keep things short, he asks how she wishes her daughter to grow up. He asks if she wants the vampires to rule the world, or if she wants revenge on the dragons who punished the vampires. While those sound like interesting choices, Vivienne asks Jack to come closer. She points out the fact he's different from others as Valentine's disciple. However, all she wants for her daughter Charlotte is for her to live a happy life. Before she's finally over, she asks for Jack's name, and he introduces himself as Jack Valentine. With that said, Jack's sure he'll be able to take care of Charlotte. So he tells her not to worry and to rest in peace. With that, she thanks Jack for this, tells Charlotte she loves her, and finally bites the dust. From there, Charlotte begins to cry after losing her mother while Jack picks up Valentine. Then there's Dragon Man in the corner who begins to laugh after all the drama. He points out the fact Jack wants to take care of Charlotte, who looks like she's about to die as well. He continues to make fun of the vampires, but at this point, Jack has snapped and he attacks the dude, making a hole in the building as well. The dude flies out of the building, but he lands safely. He finds the fact that Jack suddenly attacked to be rude, and with that, he prepares for battle as well. He's about to do some fancy attack, but Valentine asks who he is. This action surprises him, and he pauses since he never felt any mana. Then he notices the talking doll, which is Valentine. Other than the two lords, 5 dragons stay in the forest of monsters. Valentine figures that the man isn't one of them since he's only 200 years old. So she wonders if he's a dragon that was born before that time. After hearing that, the man gets enraged that she knows something like that and wonders who she is. After the dragon demands to know who the doll is, Jack gets pretty annoyed at his attitude. Then Valentine asks to be put down. Once she is, she introduces herself to the dragon. Even this dragon is aware of Valentine Milrose. She was also called the Immortal Necromancer. However, she finds the alias to be stupid now. The dragon doesn't believe her, so she calls out 2 names, Bahamut and Volamot, and the dragon's shocked after hearing this. It turns out those are the true names of the 2 dragon lords, and only those who have seen them face to face know it. And since the doll knows them, the dragon believes that she's Valentine. What he wants to know is how she's still alive. Either way, it doesn't matter to him. It turns out our guy's a sublime fire dragon named Valactus Machiavelli, and he never expected to run into a legend like Valentine. Apparently he wanted to kill Charlotte as well. With that, Valentine orders him to leave. But Valactus isn't taking orders from her and reminds her about the promise. According to him, the dragons pitied all the other creatures and showed them mercy. And even with that, Valentine's ordering him to leave. However, this dude has been severely misinformed. It was actually Valentine who bestowed the grace, not the dragons, and Valactus is shocked after hearing this. The reason why the dragons were separated from humans was because their egos were as big as their physical sizes. Their belief that they were superior to everything was why war broke out between species. At this point, Valactus has heard enough and doesn't want to listen to an old hag. After this comment, Jack calls out to the magical lizard, and now he's pissed that an oversized 4-limbed reptile had the nerve to insult his master. After that, Valactus leaps into the air and tries to slash Jack with his claws. But Jack dodges easily and lands an easy mangy kick to the jaw. This sends him crashing into a wall. After that, Jack approaches him and lifts his chin with his foot. That's what he gets for disrespecting the master. However, the dragon's outraged by this, but Jack just tells him to shut up before he dies. Then Valactus grabs his leg and sends him crashing into the house. After a while, he emerges from the smoke and now his outfit has gotten dirty from that. Jack shows Charlotte the kind of person she considers an uncle. Then she begins to cry. Jack picks her up from the ground and lets her to take a good look at him. He's the person who killed vampires and probably killed her father, whom she never knew as well. On top of that, he toyed with her mother until she died. This is too much for Charlotte to take in. However, Jack mentions that he got her mother's permission to take care of her. While he draws his sword, Jack lets Charlotte know that her answer is the most important one. So Jack's determined to show her how powerful her protector is, as he leaps into the air to attack. Now it's time for a battle between an OP second circle user and an overgrown 200-year-old lizard. Jack swings his sword first, but Valactus jumps back, dodging Jack's attack. After a while, the two of them charge at each other to attack and exchange various slashes with each other. After that exchange, Valactus figures that Jack's not a strong mana user. Before he can finish his statement, part of his hair falls off. It turns out that was Jack's goal since it was disturbing him. Now the dragon is angry, and he's not going to hold back anymore. He fires an attack called Windcutter at Jack, but he's not bothered by it and easily blocks it. Valactus is shocked by this. He has every right to be since Jack just deflected a dragon's spell like it's nothing. Then Jack jumps in the air, grabs the dude's face, and slams him in the ground. After beating him up, Jack finally remembers Valactus. He's the loser's son of another dragon named Luca Machiavelli, one of the 5 dragons who oversees the forest of monsters. Of course, Valactus is shocked by this fact. As for how Jack knows Valactus's father, he ended up cutting his head in his previous life. However, he never saw Valactus during that time. So Jack figures he died in some accident or was hiding for his life. Another thing Jack does know is that he acts just like his father. After revealing this, Valactus wonders who he's dealing with. But Jack answers that he's the student of Valentine, the person he insulted. Still, it's surprising that Jack dissolved a dragon spell since humans normally can't do that. After seeing what the strongest life form on the land has to offer, Jack points his sword at the dragon and gives him 5 seconds to bow and apologize to his master. And if he doesn't, Jack will grind him to dust and wipe him off the face of the planet, the same thing the dragon has done to others. The countdown begins while Velactus is on a knee. Just as Jack counts to 1, Velactus grows a pair of wings and flies away. Since things aren't good for him now, he has to run away. At the same time, he intends to report what just happened to other dragons. On the other hand, Jack never expected him to run away. However, he's not out of options to stop him. He prepares another attack, and then Velactus gives a look of terror. He takes a look and contemplates if Jack's launching an ICBM. But apparently, this is another one of those fundamental moves, and this one's called Wind. So after witnessing this, Velactus wonders what kind of monster he's up against. Welcome to the Shadow Realm where we have Velactus running away in fear. Then there's the Jack of his nightmares that he can't get away from. Then he trips and falls to the ground, and at this point, it's over for him. The Jack figure goes to get him. Then the real Jack wakes up from sleep and finds himself in a room he's never seen before. He takes a look around and wonders where he's at. Then Ron enters the room, sad that his master is unconscious, but he spots him awake, and they are both surprised to see each other. Ron rushes to check on Jack to see if he can still remember him, but he still remembers who his servant is and asks him to back off. What he wants to know is why Ron's with him and where he is. After some stuttering from Ron, Jack remembers about Charlotte and Valentine, and he wants to know where they are. So Ron informs that Charlotte was cleaned up, and she's currently sleeping in a different room. Even though he doesn't know what happened to her, she was pretty exhausted. Then for the random doll, he points at it, and it's currently sitting on a chair. While Valentine's not in the best mood after this, Jack's delighted to see her. When Ron discovers that the doll can talk, Jack figures that his master might be mad at him. However, she denies this obvious fact. While the master and student chat, Ron wonders how the doll can talk. On top of that, it's been on that spot for 3 days. It's a long story to explain everything, so Jack just shortens it to she's his master. Then he tells Ron to be careful of what he says to her. With how serious Jack sounded, Ron believes there's a reason for it, so he complies. With that out of the way, Jack asks for a breakdown of what happened, so Ron explains everything. The guards who accompanied Jack were found dead, and House Valentier found out. Naturally, they sent a knight to investigate, and the knight tracked Jack, believing he could explain what happened. Besides, since the crime scene was near Arbeloa, a few people must have informed him at the village. After that, there were rumors that Jack was spotted near the Azambal Duchy, but what they saw was Jack's wind attack. Then he was found unconscious and badly injured, so he was carried to a temple for treatment. They ended up feeding him 3 strawberry-flavored top-tier potions, and this is Jack's favorite flavor. But putting that aside, Jack wonders why Ron isn't doing the one thing he promised, protecting Elizabeth. So, Ron explains that the Marquis refused to let her come along in searching for Jack, and since Ron knew him well, he was sent in her place. Jack is surprised after hearing this, but he figures that his father is actually dumber than he thought. While master and servant have their reunion, a knight shows up from nowhere, and he notices that Jack's awake. Now we have the red-haired knight named Gonzalez. He's the deputy commander of the Iron Blood Order, and also in charge of the team investigating the incident. He steps forward and warns Jack about any shenanigans involving Charlotte. Even though he believes Jack is inferior to Phelan, Gonzalez believes that he should still uphold his reputation as the Marquis's son. Ron takes what he said personally, but Jack stops him from going on and wants to hear whatever nonsense the knight has to say. So with that, Gonzalez wants to ask Jack some questions about the incident. However, Jack recalls that he was given 3 top-tier potions. So, he's giving Gonzalez 3 chances to be cool. Now Jack's ready to answer with a menacing glare. Gonzalez notices something different about Jack since he normally can't look him in the eyes. Either way, he asks for what happened. Then Jack explains the exact story. The guards were given a strange order to break his limbs. In the middle of the explanation, Jack asks what's up with Gonzalez's funny face. From his expression, it looks like it's his first time hearing it. But Gonzalez wants to get back on track. What he doesn't know is that he's already on strike too. Man better pray to the Lord for what's about to happen. Anyway, back to the story. Jack narrates that during the 4-day trip to the academy, the guards said they would break his limbs and heal them back every day. As if that wasn't savage enough, the 6th Circle Knight named Raisin took things further by saying he would destroy Jack's mana circles. After that explanation, Ron's pretty nervous about what he's saying, but Jack figures that he knows what's up. Then Jack rounds up the story saying he killed them. Of course, Gonzalez is surprised to hear this. So, Jack does him a favor, rises from his bed and repeats himself crystal clear. With that information, Gonzalez figures that the attack wasn't an outside attack. On top of that, it's from the so-called useless child of House Valentier. But what's confusing him is how was he able to do it? Jack, on the other hand, is a person who would torment people trying to harm him. While it may seem like a joke, he's playing no games. Gonzalez then warns him about his tone, and before he can go on, Ron grabs his arm and would like to talk with him. Unfortunately, Gonzalez pushes him away since he's just a servant. After seeing this, Jack finally loses it and punches him so hard that he's now unconscious. The reason for Jack's sudden action is because that's strike 3. After that, Jack begins to feel dizzy and falls on the bed. As Ron goes to check on his master, Jack points out that the dude he just punched is a 7th circle user. Then he mentions the fact Ron's always acting as that weak servant and wonders if he's tired of it. After that, Jack grabs Ron's shirt and says that he doesn't need to do that anymore. At first, he thought it would be best if he kept doing what he did, but things have changed now. He figures he should have looked out for the people who care for him, so they don't get mistreated by others. Although that isn't what Jack said before, he doesn't find the idea bad either way. So with that, Ron focuses his attention on Gonzalez. Even though Jack may not remember, he looked down on him and Ron in the past. Then Jack wonders how much time Ron will need to teach him a lesson, but a minute's enough. Now we might learn that Ron is one of the coldest characters alive. When it comes to cooking, Ron's a boss at it. However, it's not only food that he's good at cooking. Watch him as he completely cooks Gonzalez in combat. At this point, Gonzalez has gone from deputy commander to deputy punching bag. Who knew that a servant like Ron had what it takes to throw some serious hands? Gonzalez tries to fight back, but he's a lost cause at this point. Ron easily dodges his attack and strikes again. The whole commotion draws the attention of nearby staff, and they are shocked by what's playing out. Meanwhile, Jack watches the fight and Ron's movements seem familiar to him. He has seen Ron fight before, but that's only using mana and spells and stuff since he's a 9th circle mage. That means his main skill should be in magic, not physical combat. But somehow he's able to body Gonzalez even though he's not jacked or anything. So Jack figures he must have a ton of fighting experience. Even if Ron's a spy from the Thulkan Empire, Jack still won't be able to kill him or beat him up. Well, back to the fight, and Gonzalez is showing signs of being a sore loser. He yanks a sword from a nearby guard and tries to kill Ron with it. Of course, Ron's prepared for this. He closes in and lands a solid knee right to the knight's face. After seeing how his servant fights like Mike Tyson in his prime, Jack figures that it must have been tough for Ron, who had such skills, to put up with his attitude. Then he calls to Ron, who seems to be enjoying every moment of the brawl. He mentions that it's taking long to finish up Gonzalez. While Ron pays attention to his master, Gonzalez tries to land a sneaky one at 1 HP, but a single punch from Ron ends him, and he's cooked. The entire fight took 1 minute and 12 seconds, so Jack points out that Ron has to get back in shape. Then there are the 2 random guards. Jack orders them to quit staring, and they head back to their posts. Now that's over, Jack yanks the dude's hair and wants to have a friendly chat with Gonzalez. Looking at his status, he seems like a competent fellow and is Marquis approved as well. Gonzalez is outraged that a servant beat him up, but a firm tug on his hair shuts his mouth. Even though he's been defeated, he has completed his investigation and found the culprit of the incident. So, mission failed successfully. Looking at Gonzalez, he's the favorite knight of the Marquis, the 3rd most powerful knight in House Valentier, and is currently in his late 30s. But most importantly, he's a deputy commander, and it would be a waste to kill him. So, Jack asks if he's interested in becoming an 8th circle user, and a commander at that. But Gonzalez is surprised at the way things are going. But to gain those things, Jack asks that he promise him one thing. However, before we can hear that promise, Ron sees the conversation and figures that Jack is up to his usual schemes. But anyway, he's glad about the fine young man his master has grown into. Then he gets poked on the knee. He spots Valentine and gets on a knee since she's the master of his master. But she skips the chit-chat and asks if he's associated with Dokwan, and Ron is shocked after getting this question. Valentine wonders if Ron is associated with Dokwan. Looking at his past, he became a 9th circle user around 20 years ago. Since he became a 9th circle user in his mid-20s, he must have held a high spot in Dokwan. But now Ron's glory days are gone and he's a servant. Not only that, he also had the potential to become a 10th circle or even control spirits. Then Valentine asks if it has been 20 years since he last used mana. Well, kind of. It has actually been 19 years. From the moment he stepped foot in the Marquess's estate with Jack and Elizabeth's mother, he never used mana again. However, the only time he used mana was to chase after Jack. Even though it doesn't seem of any importance currently, Ron doesn't regret being giganerfed to the Phantom Zone, and also doesn't care about being looked down on as a servant. He has no interest in fame and is fine with just serving Jack. Valentine has been curious about Jack's talent so far, but now she's seen that a warrior of Dokwan is willing to sacrifice his life for him. Then she wonders if he's aware of this. Apparently, Jack had told Ron that he had a hunch about his past, but he decided not to dig into it. So Ron's positive that Jack knows of his past, but doesn't want to make a big deal of it. However, it appears Jack hasn't been listening to the conversation. If he was, he would have asked what on earth a Dakwon is, since there's a lot he still doesn't know. Anyway, back to Jack, who's busy threatening Gonzalez. He asks the frightened Gonzalez once again if he would like to become a commander. At this point, Gonzalez is speechless and stutters in fright. However, this seems like one of those choices where the reply doesn't matter, and Jack gets on him. Even though Gonzalez is frightened after receiving a beating, Jack tells him not to move or circulate his mana. Then he reaches for Gonzalez's chest and does a few mana things. He circulates his mana through his victim's body until he finds the mana circles. Currently, there are 7 of them revolving around his heart, and now Jack's mana gets to them. Gonzalez notices that something's up with his mana circles, but Jack stops him from struggling. He may not know what Jack's up to, but one thing for sure is Jack isn't killing him. If he wanted to, Gonzalez wouldn't even be alive by now. So with that, Jack continues what he's doing with the mana circles. A few mana moments later, there's some kind of explosion in one of the circles, while Gonzalez prays for his life. Shortly, the procedure has been completed, and he can now open his eyes. He checks his mana circles, and now, the deputy commander has 8 mana circles. However, it's only temporary and will last for 3 to 5 months. Gonzalez is confused by this and wonders who Jack is exactly. Unfortunately, he's not in a spot to ask questions. As for what will happen to him next, he doesn't have a choice but to follow all of Jack's orders. And if he refuses, he'll die in the most brutal way imaginable. Of course, he's terrified to hear this fact. After all, Jack's the person who learned dark magic according to the rumors. Now let's go back to the past for a bit. After the time Jack beat up Phelan and was imprisoned, Marquis Valentier spread a rumor about Jack saying that he used dark magic. But it turns out that was no rumor. It was actually true, and Gonzalez just experienced it for himself. Then Jack orders him to get on his knees, and Gonzalez has no choice but to obey. Now Jack wants to give him his first assignment as his underling. He orders Gonzalez to return to Valentier Manor and report that he doesn't know anything about Jack, and Gonzalez agrees to this. For the next mission, Jack tells him to murder at least 40 vassals of House Mantees at the manor within 3 months. This includes knights who are on the Marquis's side. Gonzalez agrees, but then it fully hits him and he's shocked by what he has to do. Of course, he has no choice in this matter. Jack didn't give him an extra mana circle for nothing, so Gonzalez has to keep this in mind. With that said, Jack gets up from his seat and goes to his new servant. He assures him that everything will be fine, as long as he follows his orders. After all, Gonzalez became an 8th circle user almost instantly, and Jack entices him saying there's more where that came from. However, the guy's still nervous. He has every reason to be since he can't say no. But there's another thing left. From the way Ron had whooped him, Jack figures that Gonzalez must have done a few things in the past to piss him off. So, because of that, he'll now have a taste of how it is to be a servant and will be serving Ron. Obviously, Gonzalez is depressed to hear that, and Jack will be getting feedback from Ron in addition. After that's settled, Jack yeets the new servant out of the room. Now he has Chickling Model 2. Model 1 was a complete buffoon and got himself killed. But hopefully, number 2 will be a better candidate. Anyway, Jack checks on Ron, who was talking with Valentine, and he has finished his chat with her. Now that everything's been sorted, Jack wants to go grab a bite. However, Ron doesn't approve of him going out with that hospital patient drip. So he came prepared and packed a set of clothes for Jack. Since a lot of Jack's things were ruined, Ron had prepared some clothes in advance. So Jack thanks Ron for looking out for him as usual. Just as he's about to head out, the door opens. Jack believes it's Gonzalez again until someone rushes at him. It turns out this person's actually Charlotte, and she goes to hug Jack. She then begins to cry because she is worried about Jack. With this encounter, Jack informs Ron that he'll be out for a while, and tells him to make the good food that he always does. As expected, Ron complies with his request. Then there's Charlotte, who hasn't had any blood, but she's still strong enough to squeeze the life out of Jack. One suffocating hug later, the two of them head outside. Jack apologizes for wrecking her house, but it's cool with Charlotte. She believes that even if it were still standing, it wouldn't matter for her to live there since her mother is dead. Charlotte begins to cry since her mother's dead, and it wouldn't mean anything to live in the house. After she says that, Jack steps up and holds her hand. Of course, since he's the protagonist, his mother also died just like every other one out there. He was so little when she died that he barely knows what she looked like. But even with that, Ron and his master were there to support him. Even though his life seemed miserable, he still got to experience happiness. After that, Jack slits his wrist with some mana, and he begins to bleed. Then he shoves his bleeding wrist into Charlotte's mouth. It's what it seems. He's offering some of his blood to her, and she's enjoying it. With how she's biting down on his hand, Jack figures she must have been pretty hungry. And when she's done drinking Jack's blood, her body heals instantly, and straight outta Africa-looking vampire is no more. It turns out this pretty fast recovery is the reason why vampires were almost as strong as dragons. If they drink the right kind of blood, they can recover quickly. Anyway, Charlotte is shocked by this action, but she feels much better either way. So she thanks Jack for the blood. Then he asks her what she thinks. After all, he did say he was going to show the power of her protector. While it was a bit scary to her, she also admits it was satisfying as well. So with that, she commends Jack and also refers to him as my lord. However, Jack doesn't approve of that since she's going to be working for him. So he asks her to call him boss, and Charlotte doesn't see any problem with that. Later on, Jack heads indoors for a feast. He tells Ron about the dragon he defeated, and Ron finds that outrageous. He's very confused by this, but it's the reaction Jack expected to receive. When a dragon turns 10 years old, it already has around 4 or 5 mana circles, and the time it reaches 50, it may have reached the master stage. Then there's something called incarnation. It's when a dragon changes its giant body into a normal human form, but it's different from polymorphing. Normally, a dragon's normal body is specialized to use magic, but incarnation raises its physical power to the max. While Jack avoids eating his vegetables, he recalls his past battle with Velactus. If he was a bit more careful, Jack would have found him difficult. But in the end, Jack was victorious, and for something that was 2 centuries old, he considers it to be an idiot. Ron's a bit confused by Jack's statement. But on the other hand, Jack figures that no matter how skilled he is, he's still a second circle user. It would sound ridiculous for Jack to fight a 10th circle user. But as for the dragon, he lacked experience and couldn't use incarnation. In the end, he got scared, used some magic, and ran away, which all led to his death. With those in mind, Jack realizes something. Any sane person wouldn't believe he killed a dragon. For instance, the folks of the Fire Ant mercenaries would just laugh it off as usual. But Ron casually accepted Jack's ramblings. So Jack figures that Ron knows a lot of things like dragons still exist. With that said, there's no way Ron's beating these allegations. However, he thought Jack would know everything about him since he time traveled and all that. But Jack has no idea about that. The only thing he knows is that Ron died an untimely death. Even though Jack knows quite a bit, there are still some things he doesn't know. Ron informs him that telling him everything is going to be a long story. However, Jack doesn't want to hear the full gist. He's aware that Ron's a careful man. He never told Jack anything even from the time they escaped the Marquis's manor in his past life. After all, everyone has a few secrets. But there's still one thing on his mind. Out of nowhere, he wants to ask his servant a question. Jack wonders if Ron has any connections with the Thulkan Empire. Or more accurately, if he's a spy. Of course, there's no way Ron would do such a thing. After hearing that response, Jack goes, "Understandable, have a nice day." He was suspicious for a moment, but he's relieved after the response. However, Jack wants him to realize that he doesn't want to burden him. But judging from the smile on Ron's face, he believes he caught on. Now for the next plan, Jack wants to make more mana circles. In his current stage, he goes out of action whenever he uses his soul aura. So, he has to increase his mana circles and regain his former glorious physique so he can withstand the force of using it. But that's a thought for another day. He still has to get to the academy. Shortly, Valentine shows up, surprising Jack. It turns out he used a move called the Dark Halter, and she figures that he's definitely the one. Apparently, this Dark Halter is a dark magic spell that only she and Jack know. The reason why it's only the two of them who know that spell is because Valentine is the one who created it. Her glory days were during the time of war, so she used this spell against enemy spies. What happens is that she creates a mana circle by force and carves a vow within it. If the vow wasn't upheld, the person would instantly turn Minecraft creeper mode and explode on the spot. It was this brutal spell that made her pretty infamous. Anyway, Valentine wonders the kind of vow Jack carved into Gonzalez's mana circle and what he's after. But Jack just did that for insurance for Ron and his sister Elizabeth. After hearing that, Ron's touched that his master's looking out for him. However, this emotional display doesn't sit right with Jack. Shortly, Charlotte pays a visit. She's seeking refuge from all the maids who wouldn't stop bothering her. But she came in at just the right time, so Jack offers her a seat. Ron then offers to make her a meal, but thanks to Jack, she's already full. And Ron's confused by this. Jack intends to let Charlotte attend the academy as well, so he asks Ron if that'll be possible. But Ron considers himself as just a mere servant. While that's true, he's still a competent servant. Even with all that competence, Jack wonders if he still doesn't know anything. Now Ron's put on edge and he still claims to not have a say. Since he refuses to talk, Jack decides to take matters into his own hands. After hearing that, Ron advises him not to threaten people, but surely that isn't Jack's intention, right? Anyway, Charlotte springs from her seat after hearing she'll be going to the academy. After all, every kid needs their education, plus Charlotte's too talented to leave her like that. Currently, she doesn't have any mana circles, but with good training, she can easily get all 10 mana circles. In fact, she could be capable of using soul aura as well. As for how she'll get admitted, Jack figures that one recommendation letter from Gonzalez will do the trick. But the only problem left is her age. The minimum accepted age for the academy is 14, but Charlotte's 11 years old, so she'll have to be admitted through some other shady ways. But one thing for sure is that she'll definitely attend like the other kids. A few days later, Jack and his crew finally arrive at the academy. A while ago, Ron had packed up a few extras for Jack, and he's grateful for this. With that, Ron prepares to leave, and he's still intent on watching over his master. However, Jack asks for a favor. He instructs him to handle any issues that may arise in the family. From this, Ron figures that Jack wants to remain focused in the academy. While that may be true, Jack also doesn't trust Gonzalez and figures that he may not be a smart guy. In fact, he holds him in zero regard and even plans to get rid of him when he's done with whatever he ordered him to do. So Jack wants Ron to manage him as well. Apparently, the plan is to slowly cut off the hands and feet of Marquess Valentier. By hands and feet, he's talking about House Mantas and the elders of House Valentier. Then there's Elizabeth. Jack figures that she's way too kind. He doesn't want her to become a menace like himself, but he's doing all of this to give her a push and make the proper change. So, Jack asks Ron to keep an eye on her. As expected, Ron agrees and points out how much his master has changed. After that, the gates to the academy open up. As Jack and his followers enter, Valentine notes that he has a pretty loyal subordinate. To Jack, he's not just any subordinate, but a good person as well. Then there's another good person, and that would be Jack's master. Somehow Jack's words get to her, and she's flattered. Meanwhile, Charlotte is amazed to see a place like the academy since it's her first time. Shortly, a maid welcomes Jack, and Charlotte retreats back to him like it's a reflex. The maid then bows and reveals that the headmaster is waiting for him. Jack goes to meet him, and the headmaster has heard all about his antics. The rumors about buildings being destroyed and finding a child noble covered in blood have all spread around. On top of that, Jack made all those headlines. He scans the room he's currently in since it's been a long while he's visited. The headmaster's name is Rommel Einhard Assenblay, a former Duke of House Assenblay. However, his son has taken over that job. Now, Rommel's the headmaster of the academy. From what Jack has seen, things are the same as always, just like when he came to the very same office in his past life. Back then, Jack was contemplating if it would be allowed for him to take an exam. At this time, he looked like he was in a pretty rough state, but the headmaster assured him that everything would be all right. With how his family was going, Rommel was very sure that either his father or brother would kill him before he came of age. But this situation he's in doesn't seem unfamiliar to Rommel. After hearing that, Jack wondered what he should do, but places his hand on Jack's head and says he has to figure out that one by himself. However, the headmaster did give him a single room at the dormitory and other benefits from preferential treatment. Back to the current moment, Jack's no longer that nervous child of before. He calls the headmaster old man and would like to make a deal with him. Rommel is shocked by his display of confidence in calling him that. And Jack wants to save his life one time since he's indebted to him from the past and asks for a favor in return. From this statement that Jack just made, Rommel can tell that Jack has gone through some changes. The first time he met him, he was covered in wounds and he was very timid. Now he's a different person within the 1 month he never saw him. Well, that's for the headmaster. Jack, on the other hand, hasn't seen him for 20 years. They say that 20 years is 2 epochs, and that's more than enough time to make a change. Anyway, Rommel finds what Jack said earlier to be interesting, and asks him to explain how his life will be saved. According to Jack's memories, the Thulkan Empire defeated the Theslan Kingdom in exactly 1 month. While Theslan tried their best, the Thulkans had 30 masters, and most of them were turned into dragon hybrids. On top of that, they had more than 1,000 mana users who were 7th circle users and above. Comparing this with the 2 masters of Theslan and barely 100 high-level mana users, we can see how they're not winning this one. Even with that, Jack finds it crazy that it took 1 month for Thulkan. If he were the Empire's commander, 3 days would have been more than enough for him. But the reason Theslan could hold out for a month was because of the headmaster before Jack. During the time of the war, it turns out Rommel led a magic corps consisting of 700 of his soldiers. They appeared out of nowhere and fought for Theslan. If things went perfectly, Theslan would have lasted for 2 extra months. But since we don't live in a perfect world, he was betrayed and killed by a person Rommel trusted the most, Brutus. Rommel is startled after Jack calls out that name. He then tries to correct Jack not to call an instructor by their first name, but Jack doesn't care. He says that person's a spy from the Thulkan Empire. Brutus Marco is currently a 6th Circle Knight who's the assistant instructor of the swordsmanship department and a vassal of House Assenbull. On top of that, he's a person who seems to look up to Rommel. This means that Jack just insulted a House Assenbull vassal. Again, Jack doesn't care and he warns Rommel that he'll regret not listening to him. But Rommel advises him not to do anything rash and is willing to overlook what he just heard. So with that, he tells Jack to leave. However, Jack rummages through his pocket and places a crest on the table. He's a man of his word and lets Rommel know that something might come up in the office. Either way, he asks for Brutus to be brought in. A while later, Brutus arrives at the office. Jack's a man who likes to get to the point, so he thanks him for his service and tells him that he doesn't need to provide the Thulkans with more info. Brutus is startled after hearing this, and he doesn't seem to be aware of what Jack's talking about. But Jack doesn't plan on repeating himself. Brutus also recognizes Jack as that noble kid who was involved in an accident, so he figures that Jack must have injured his head instead of his body. Even if the headmaster spares him, Brutus informs Jack that he'll face punishment for this accusation. At this point, Jack has lost his patience and he gets up from his seat. With the crest in his hand, he punches the instructor not just for being a spy, but for also yapping. That sudden attack from Jack sends Brutus stumbling backward. Rommel doesn't interfere with the matter though, but Brutus wonders what's going on. Suddenly, Jack attacks again, and it appears he's going to fight for real. So Brutus throws a right since Jack has just assaulted an instructor, but Jack can dodge a punch like that any day, like he's Spider-Man. Then Brutus is surprised after seeing that. On the other hand, Jack can see the 6 mana circles protecting his opponent. But still, there's a weakness. Jack sucker punches him in the gut, and it's super effective. Then Brutus is launched into some nearby furniture. Rommel is shocked to see what just played out, while Jack breaks the crest from earlier, hoping that's the only thing in the office that broke. Next, Jack approaches Brutus, who's on low HP, planning to make him confess his deeds. To be on the safe side, Jack suggests that he should peacefully turn himself in. However, Brutus still decides to play dumb. Now it's time to take things a step further. Jack places his hand on his victim's chest and learns that he has 6 mana circles, all of which he worked pretty hard to create. Since it's far more significant to break something someone worked pretty hard for, I believe we can all see where this is going. Jack wants to ask Brutus a few questions, and for each one he answers wrongly, Jack will break one of his mana circles. Of course, Brutus is terrified to hear that, but there's no time to think because a question's on the way. The first question is pretty simple. Jack asks if he's a spy from the Thulkan Empire. Chills run down Brutus's spine after hearing that, but he eventually denies that he's a spy. That's not what Jack wants to hear, so there goes one circle. In seconds, Brutus is now a 5th circle mana user. Jack asks the question again, but Brutus remains silent this time. From that, Jack wonders if he can't bring himself to confess. Normally, when someone's mana circle breaks, it can be recreated with a lot of effort. However, Jack made the case to be different. It turns out that he put some mana inside Brutus's heart, so he'll never be able to make a new mana circle, no matter how much he tries. Jack points out he'll never be able to make mana circles like the sadist that he is. But not all hope is lost. He informs Brutus that there's a way to remake a broken mana circle. As for how to recreate a broken mana circle, Jack brings up methods like the famous Thulkan dragon part infusion process. Just maybe that will make Brutus able to recreate a broken mana circle. After he says that, Brutus wonders how he knows something like that. Now it seems Jack's in a step in the right direction because Brutus seems to know something. So with that, Jack figures that he's gotten the green light to start with his experiment. To prepare, he gets on Brutus, who is still shocked at this point. Somehow, as a 6th circle user, he knows up to the extent of dragons and the human experiments. At this point, Brutus begins to freak out and wonders how Jack knows about the Thulkan's secret research. From his outburst, Jack has just struck a gold mine. But Brutus isn't going to get an answer to how he knows that. So Jack runs his mana through him, shatters a few more mana circles, and he's now done. It turns out he just broke all of Brutus's mana circles, so he has nothing left of his life now. With that out of the way, Jack returns his attention to Rommel. Since he just saved the old man's life, Rommel has to repay with a favor. Then there's Brutus, who's still conscious on the ground. He tells Jack that Thulkan won't let him get away with what he's done, he's going to rip through Jack and all that. But a single stomp shuts the guy up. Now that the second phase is over, Jack apologizes to Rommel since he's given him something to clean up. However, Rommel is still fascinated by Jack's sudden switch in attitude, but Jack says that he managed to change a lot in the past month. From that unclear answer, Rommel decides not to press further for more details on his change. But one thing he must know is how Jack discovered the spy, including the dragon-human experiments. Before the conversation goes into an endless side quest, Jack reminds Rommel of the deal from earlier. He seems to be aware of the signs of war that are showing up. In the Thulkan Empire, there's already a fight for the throne. This fight is between the moderate party led by the second prince of the imperial family, and the hardline party which supported the crown prince. In the end, the hardline party won, and after that, the Thulkan Empire unified the continent. However, since Jack lived in the mountains for 10 years with his master, he doesn't know the exact details. Anyway, Jack leaves Brutus to Rommel to do whatever he wants. The fact Brutus knows about the dragons means he knows more than expected. So Jack tells Rommel that he's free to gather more intel from him that will be useful to both himself and the king. However, Rommel's confused when Jack mentions the king, but what else is he supposed to call him? He definitely can't call him what's on his mind. But anyway, Jack wonders how a 6th circle knows about the experiment. At the current moment, the half-dragon experiment has passed animal testing and is being moved to the human testing stage. According to the details he heard in his past life, plus some random documents he found, this experiment was considered Area 51 level of secret, even within Thulkan. Anyway, Jack has a favor to ask of Rommel. Scratch that, he has 2 favors to ask. Since the headmaster obviously has a lot of money, his first request is a private villa near the academy, and one that has a garden at least. Rommel reminds him of the rule that all students should stay in the dormitory, but Jack says there are exceptions to rules. This was one of Rommel's teachings to him, by the way. As for his second wish, Jack asks him to admit a certain kid into the academy as a first-year student. However, this is the second semester, and students are admitted only in the first. But Jack knows that the headmaster can always work his magic around that. Rommel figures that the child Jack's talking about is the pale one outside, Charlotte. So, he's curious about Jack's relationship with her. He reveals he's her new benefactor. After hearing that, Rommel lets out a sigh and is like, "Sure thing, buddy." Jack, on the other hand, wonders why he's sighing since it's true. A while later, Jack comes out of the office, and Charlotte is excited to see her boss. After Jack gives her some head pats, she wonders if the academy will be her new school. Jack tells her it will be, and she's delighted to hear that. But shortly, her smile turns upside down. Since she looked happy literally seconds ago, Jack wonders why the sad face. It turns out she never expected to attend the academy. Normally, the academy is a place for only humans, and as we all know, she isn't one. So she's upset with this fact. However, Jack wonders why that matters and asks if she's ashamed of being a vampire. But of course she isn't. While Jack isn't in the position to say this, he considers Charlotte's fate to be really unfortunate. Her family, House Royal, ruled for generations. The name alone is a dead giveaway that it was a royal family of vampires. But now most, if not all of them, have been killed, including Charlotte's father. Her mother, Vivienne, was her only family left, but we all saw how that turned out. But even with that, Jack tells her to have pride in herself, and not to get involved in what she is. Regardless of what she is, she's still Charlotte de Royale. And as for Jack, he still intends to keep his word and take care of her. As her benefactor, he's willing to take care of her requests, whether she wants to become a queen or rebuild her tribe. No matter what she's going through, Jack's there to take care of her problems, so he tells her not to think so low of herself again. After that speech, Charlotte becomes a bit nervous, but she thanks him. However, her mother had told her that nothing in the world is free, and she is correct. Charlotte doesn't see anything she can do for her boss, but Jack says it's all right. He plans to ask for something much later, and all she has to do is help Jack with that. With that said, Charlotte promises to assist him when the time comes. Now she's all better. Jack suggests that they do some sightseeing since their manor will take a while to be ready. Anyway, back to the past for a bit. Rommel informs Jack that Charlotte will be admitted either on the current day or the next. As for the manor, it would be ready in 2 hours. However, since it's pretty difficult to look after a huge villa alone, Rommel offers to send in some housekeepers. Jack thanks the old man for this act of consideration. However, he believes it's an excuse, and Rommel's actually trying to keep an eye on him. But it doesn't matter anyway. Jack spots one of the rare moments his master is smiling. He wonders why she looks so proud. Valentine found what Jack said to Charlotte earlier to be nice, and discovered that he places more value on identity. She always thought he was just a twisted individual, but it's nice to see that part of him. After hearing that, Jack decides to take that as a compliment. Shortly, they come across a dude who seems to be training his heart out. Jack figures it's nothing that concerns him, but Valentine tugs his ear and wants to watch him, so Jack agrees and they all take a seat. After receiving Valentine's odd request, Jack takes a look at the dude. He appears to be 17 with a pretty good physique, then Jack goes for the mana check. After scanning him, he's surprised by what he's seeing and wonders if it's for real. Jack is completely surprised after looking at the mysterious person's mana. He's a second circle user and only has the potential to become a fourth circle user. Jack's disappointed after seeing such level of mid and wonders if Valentine's interested in him. He's not afraid he'll get replaced as Valentine's student, but Jack wonders why she seemed interested in the guy. She's also aware that the dude's potential in mana sucks, but there's another thing she notices about him and asks Jack to guess. However, Jack figures it might be his physique, but he's completely wrong. Some more time passes and the crew watches the dude training. Charlotte notices that he has been training so hard and looks ready to collapse at any moment. On top of that, he looks like he also sustained a few injuries while training. Jack notices this. Then Valentine asks again if he knows why she took an interest in him. After a second look, Jack notices he's had his mana circle broken. Again, recreating a broken mana circle is pretty much impossible. However, this dude seemed to have recovered all by himself. Even though he may not have good potential for mana anymore, Valentine notes that he has a strong willpower. She considers adding something else to that, but changes her mind. but Jack may have an idea of what she wants to say. While he does have a good work ethic, that's not why Valentine's interested in him. Apparently, the foundation of dark magic is death, destruction, resentment, and revenge. This dude didn't just regenerate his broken circle with sheer willpower, but also thanks to his tenacity. Underneath all of that is a deep hatred. So with that, Jack goes to meet the person. The person notices him and asks what's up. Jack then gives a few friendly swordsman tips, like how he's gripping his sword too hard and how his footwork needs some polishing up. Finally, he points out the fact he's thinking about his broken mana circle a lot, and the guy is shocked. But Jack adds that dwelling so much on it will only weaken his defense. After that critique session, the guy wonders who Jack is. But he on the other hand says he's just a guy watching, and wonders if the student gets beaten up, regardless of his physique. With how nervous he seems after that question, that might be the case. Anyway, Jack hands him a grape-flavored potion. Why is he giving it to the dude? Just because he can. As for how he got a hold of something like that, he robbed Gonzalez earlier, and now he's loaded. Next, Jack asks for the guy's name. After a bit of hesitation, the dude introduces his name as Thanos, but with way less purple. So with that, Jack wishes him luck with recovering his Infinity Stones. Before he leaves, Thanos wants to know who he's talking with, so Jack introduces himself to him. And with that, Jack heads out. Hopefully they'll meet again. On one hand, there's Valentine who doesn't resonate with Jack's cool display, and on the other, there's Charlotte who still thinks he's cool. So obviously, Jack responds to the more positive comment. Thanos takes a look at Jack who's venturing into the distance, then it finally hits his brain with 999 ping. He realizes that the person he spoke with was the Jack Valentier. The man, the myth, the one and only waste of House Valentier. Well, those are the rumors our friend Thanos heard, and there's no way he wouldn't recognize him. In fact, he was such a legend in the academy, getting unrivaled scores of all zeros in his first semester. So with all those facts, Thanos wonders if he misheard the boy's name from earlier. A while later, Jack arrives at the Azenbul Duchy near the academy. It's a place where the honored guests of House Azenbul stay. So with that, Romel's errand boy had assigned some maids to take care of Jack, and his name is John Doe. Yep, that's the same default placeholder name that Dynastismo, the leader of the Fire or Red or whatever ant mercenaries. Putting that aside, Jack commends the manner that was prepared for him. But he does note it was a place for honored guests. From the looks of this, it may appear that Romel is interfering with the fight for succession within House Valentier. So Jack wonders why John Tuno looks upset. He on the other hand doesn't consider his feelings important. He's just doing what he was told. After all, he's Romel's errand boy, but Jack, however, informs him that he's being rude. John's confused by what he means, so he clarifies that the dude is hiding his true self with polymorphism. Of course, John's shocked by this discovery, but Jack lets him off the hook with his fake name. One thing he does wonder about is why there are so many high-level mana users in such a tiny area. As far as he knows, there aren't that many 9-circle mana users in the kingdom. So he brings up his famous, "Are you a spy?" question to the errand boy. After all of that, John's shocked by how much Jack knows. Who we thought was John Doe begins to show his real identity, and he even stopped his mana flow just in case. Since Headmaster Rommel was so interested in Jack, John paid him a visit to have a look firsthand. Then we learn the man's real name is Bellamy Craig, head of the Magician's Tower of the Theslan Kingdom. Back to the past once again. And there was a war between Thulkan and Athalan. In the war, Bellamy was a person who stayed by Romel's side until he died. Anyway, Bellamy wonders how Jack knew about the polymorphism. Normally, Jack wouldn't have noticed it, but he got to know how it works after killing a certain polymorphed dragon whose name starts with V. After that arrogant response from Jack, Bellamy asks for some respect as the head of the Magician's Tower and the dean of the magic department. Since it's respect he's talking about, Jack mentions that he would have been better off introducing himself rather than making up a stupid test. Of course, Jack's pissed about this and figures that the disrespect Bellamy's receiving is well-deserved. So with that, the wizard accepts the fault and allows it to pass. Anyway, he finds Jack to be interesting and offers him a spot as his student. At this point, Jack displays a face of complete disapproval since he already has a master. It turns out Jack isn't the first volunteer he tried to recruit. Bellamy mentions the fact Elizabeth was another talented person and wanted her to become his student, but she gave the same response that he received currently. However, after seeing Jack's potential, he's never going to give him up. So Bellamy holds Jack's hands, asking him to become his student, and is never going to let him down. Jack still has a master, but the man doesn't care. While the kidnap attempt goes on, Valentine finally speaks and asks for the mage's name. While Bellamy's surprised about the talking doll, Jack introduces the guy to her, including the fact he's the head of the Magician's Tower. So with that, Valentine figures that he's qualified to become a 10th circle user soon. She then points out the fact he was attacked just before he could become a master, and Bellamy is shocked that she knows that. She can tell from the traces of a 10th circle within him. However, this concept doesn't sound strange, since it's something that happens to those who had their mana circles broken. Anyway, Valentine tells Bellamy not to give up. Even though it's impossible to grow at his age, he still has the potential since he nearly made it before. After all, the Magician's Tower is a place for those who don't give up, and he has to live up to his title as head of the tower. After hearing that speech that sounds like it's from a self-improvement podcast, Bellamy wonders who the doll is. But Valentine believes he's better off not knowing since she's merely a relic of the past. With that out of the way, Jack wants to head in since Charlotte's waiting, and he tells Bellamy that he would like to see Rommel on the first day of class. After all that, Bellamy heads out and Jack has managed to stay away from the wizard's tower. On the other hand, Valentine thinks about how this life isn't balanced. Some work hard and have very low potential, while others live with so much talent but don't realize it. So she didn't want to pass by without saying anything. After delivering such an interesting lesson, Jack's upset she won't teach him anything. But she believes she doesn't have anything to teach him. He did use the Dark Halter on Gonzalez, so that's proof that he's already learned everything he can from her. This is a good point because the Dark Halter was actually the last spell she taught Jack in his past life. Anyway, he still finds it crazy that the head of the Magician's Tower came all the way to see him personally. And as for the surveillance, they're free to watch him however they want. As Bellamy heads out, he takes a quick glance at Jack. One of his followers wonders what he's thinking about, and then she guesses that the headmaster told him something, and her guess is correct. Before the current moment, Rommel and Bellamy discuss Jack. Even though he was skilled enough to catch a spy, there are still so many strange things about him. The fact he took down a 6th circle user in a single blow is surprising enough. What makes him even more dangerous is that he's just a 2nd circle user, and Bellamy's worried about this. However, Rommel points out he's being a bit too worried. He reveals that Jack brought a new student to the academy and plans to study with her. With all he has shown so far, there's no reason to send him away, and could even be a huge blessing in the rivalry against the Thulkins. But in the meantime, they can find out how Jack discovered the spy. After all, he won't be going anywhere. With that said, Bellamy figures that the headmaster has a point, but he still feels uneasy about the matter. Either way, he's still willing to follow Rommel's orders but wants to voice a concern. He's worried that the headmaster is getting too involved in House Valentier's politics. However, Rommel is sure that they're done deciding who's going to be the next head of the family. Elizabeth, who's the firstborn, has the potential to become a master, but Marcus Valentier only sees her as a tool to gain more power. Then there's Phelan, who became a 3rd circle user at 17 years old. However, his case isn't special since there are plenty of students like that at the academy. Besides, Rommel doesn't like the guy and considers him a complete idiot. Bellamy points out the fact Rommel has grown old. He also reminds him of when he got tired of politics and stepped down from being a duke. So he wonders why Rommel's getting involved in the Valentiers matter. Letting Jack stay in a nice dorm room and skipping classes is fine with him, but going out of his way to find a manor for him is a step too far since people are obviously going to talk about it. With that said, Rommel understands his concern since they've known each other for 30 years. However, his old man senses tell him that he'll definitely get something in return if he keeps Jack around. That sounds strange to Bellamy, but Rommel just laughs about that. Since the manor will soon be ready, he asks his friend to meet Jack and have a look for himself. So with a defeated sigh, Bellamy agrees to do this. Now back to the current moment. It seems he has seen what Rommel was talking about earlier and he laughs about it. His follower notices this, but he quickly plays it off that he thought of something funny. Next, we have a look at the manor. Other than the maids, Jack counts 5 guards and a single cook in the manor. He addresses the group since they're assigned to look after him. First off, he mentions that he likes steak, so they'll be making a whole load of that for all 3 of Jack's meals. In addition, he wants them to have some vegetables on the side. Since he's a man of specific tastes, they all have to be top tier. However, Jack's already confident they won't top Ron's cooking. Next, he also mentions how he likes strawberry and tomato juice, so they'll have to make that for him daily. The guards heard all that loud and clear, however. Since they've all been assigned to Jack, he intends to make the most out of them. Well, at least most of them. He gets to the cook whose name is Gwyness, and he looks like his soul has been drained, so Jack skips him. As for the rest, Jack couldn't bother remembering all their names, so he calls them the Quintet. Anyway, he reveals they have been trained under the headmaster, and they are shocked after he says this. He also notices that everyone has had a broken mana circle, so he tells them about Tanos, and says they should work hard like him. One of the guards is shocked after he reveals this, so he wonders if the headmaster gave him a heads up. But Jack doesn't intend to answer the question. Shortly, Charlotte calls to Jack and is amazed at how large the manor is. So, Jack takes his leave and decides to look around the place with her. Jack acquired his new manor on the 9th of August, and classes start on the 16th. Currently, it's the 14th, and Jack has enjoyed the past 5 days at the manor. He did several activities like shopping with Charlotte, sightseeing, eating some good food, and even watching a play with his master. With all the activities he experienced, this could be the most peaceful time he's ever had in a long while. However, there are 2 things on his mind. First, he has to keep training and remain in shape, even though it's hard to forget how to use mana or fight. While he runs, Charlotte catches up with him and she seems to copy everything he does. But of course, there's no way Jack's going to slow down for her. After a while, the 2 of them are exhausted from the run. Then Charlotte asks if Jack's going to see someone, and he is. This brings us to the second thing on Jack's mind. He goes to watch Thanos, who's training as always, and wonders if he ever gets tired. After watching him do the same thing for 5 days, Jack now believes that Thanos is a very hard worker. He wasn't born with any talent, but he seems to be the most diligent student in the academy. After a while, Jack spots Thanos' wounds. At this point, Jack calls him out and wonders why his wounds always keep getting worse every time he spots him. As for why Jack's asking, he was wondering if Thanos used the potion he gave him. Then he hands him another one. However, Thanos seems a bit troubled as he receives the potion, and Jack notices this. Thanos points out that one of them costs 40 gold and wants to repay Jack for it. However, this doesn't answer Jack's earlier question. After taking another look at the wounds, those aren't just any scratches. Several of Thanos' bones have been fractured. With those, Jack figures that he must be in pain at this point, and he's been enduring all of it to train for the 5 days. This feat is impossible for a lot of people. Thanos heads back to training, and Jack believes that he does this for the entire day. One thing Jack wants to know is why Thanos always gets beaten up, despite having such strong willpower. Unfortunately, he doesn't answer the question and continues to train. Valentine finally speaks up about him getting ignored. While Jack finds Thanos' efforts to be adorable, Valentine feels sorry for him. Since Jack's a student of hers, he should see that Thanos is harboring so much hate and ambition in his heart. Fortunately, Jack does notice it. While those are the dude's main driving forces, they're also stopping him from controlling himself. Since it's pretty clear his progress will be regressing, Valentine can't help but feel sorry for him. However, Jack's translation to his master's language is, "You've watched him for too long. Are you recruiting him or not?" So, Jack calls to Thanos again and asks him why he's training with a sword. So Thanos replies that he aims to become the greatest swordsman on the entire continent. After hearing such an ambitious goal, Jack begins to laugh out loud. Thanos figures. It's one of those laughs where the person thinks his dream is ridiculous. But Jack clarifies that he wasn't laughing at him. He just couldn't understand what kind of ambition Thanos had in his heart. But now he gets it. From there, Jack approaches him, and Thanos wonders what's next. Then out of nowhere, Jack asks if he would like to become Chickling number 3. Meanwhile, there's Charlotte, who's happily running as she brings some water for the other 2. She then spots them at a distance and wonders if they're in the middle of a conversation. As for the conversation, Jack asks Thanos to become his Chickling, and he's obviously startled by this request. Thanos believes he misheard in some way, so he confirms whether Jack said chicking, and that is no mistake. So Jack repeats the question. However, even though Thanos doesn't know what that means, his instincts immediately tell him that it's probably not good. Jack notices that he's on his toes, so he rephrases the question using a more harmless word like freeloader. However, Thanos has been pushed beyond the depths of confusion at this point, so he tries to clarify what Jack means by that, believing he's talking about being a vassal, and Jack says it's something similar. Thanos doesn't believe he's a worthy candidate since he's a commoner, broke, and pretty much has nothing. However, Jack doesn't seem to care about that. Thanos knows the rumors around House Valentier, but he points out how Jack seems to be much different from them. Obviously, Thanos has heard of him as a student of the Academy, but still, Jack doesn't seem to be concerned. In the end, Thanos asks him to search for another person as a vassal, since he doesn't think he's worthy enough. Apparently, he seems to be worried about Jack. But anyway, Jack reminds him of the dream he has to become the best swordsman that no one ever was. So that would mean Jack will get to have the greatest swordsman ever as his vassal. But the fact that Thanos believes he'll be useless just shows how unlikely he thinks it is to reach that goal. After a brief silence, Thanos reveals that he has no talent or mana. However, he's not looking at the full picture. Jack informs him that he has something way better than having mana, and Thanos is confused by what he means. There are tons of people who were born with good talent with mana. For instance, a farmer can have insane mana potential, but could end up living an ordinary life. Another example is Jack. He was born with good mana potential, and he never found out until he met Valentine. In his case, he could see the world completely different from others. He could see mana floating in the air and around his body, but he never knew he was talented, so he didn't build any will to work hard. As for Thanos, he has the gift of working really hard. Not a lot of people are willing to work so hard that they injure themselves. So with that, Jack tells Thanos not to underestimate himself and lets him know he's pretty talented in his eyes. With all that said, Thanos is about to say something, but a voice from nowhere interrupts. Jack takes a look at who that could be and finds 3 other guys at the scene. Since the semester hasn't started yet, there shouldn't be other people present. But here they are. Anyway, the dude who looks like he's the leader of the group reminds Jack of his older brother, which makes his skin crawl, and then Thanos asks Jack to leave. The bully recalls the time he ordered Thanos not to talk with other people at the academy and threatens to beat him up for that. On the other hand, Thanos wants to attend to personal matters, so he asks Jack to leave once again. But Jack realizes that the wounds are from the random bullies, and he's about to go sicko mode. Now the bullies discovered the source of Thanos' potion from earlier. Jack wonders how he knows about it. Then he connects 1 and 2 together and figures that they snatched it from him. After hearing that he got robbed, Jack wonders why Thanos would allow a band of pests to walk all over him like that. However, the bully leader doesn't seem pleased with that tag. For the 1000th time, Thanos asks Jack to leave, but he's not going anywhere. Since the 3 musketeers were the ones who stole the potion, it's now Jack's business. Next, he points out a couple of guards hiding and tells them to come out, but there is no reply. While the person whose name I don't know doesn't seem to notice any guards, Jack has decided to beat up the small fry bullies and make them come out. At this point, Jack's motivated by the power of friendship and wants to become friends with the future greatest swordsman that has ever lived. There are 5 real marquises in the Thessalon Kingdom. This time, we're not looking at titles given to Mana Circle users, but actual nobles with land. Out of those 5, there's House Hermann who rules over the eastern region, and the child there is a problem. His name is Dietrich Hermann, the same leader of the bullies from earlier, and he will be graduating from the academy soon. His issues all started at 13 when he killed a maid. At 14, Bro started doing drugs, and at 15, he's been focused on pleasure. Even with the rumors about how he sold drugs, he had a bright future ahead since he was the eldest son of House Hermann and was on the way to becoming its successor. However, his absolute control vanished at the academy. There were too many people watching, plus all the other children were from noble families like him. So he set out to find someone who'd be a punching bag, and the perfect candidate for this was Thanos. He was a commoner who didn't even have a family name and got admitted through questionable means. So with that, he called to Thanos and without further ado began to assault him. Of course, Dietrich was enjoying himself until he felt a crunch after another kick to Thanos. It was the sound of a bottle breaking, and not just any bottle, the potion that Jack gave to him. After seeing this, Dietrich believes that commoners shouldn't be carrying potions, and he beat the commoner up with a stick while Thanos braced for impact. And that's the story of what happened. Now, Dietrich and his gang are on the receiving end from Jack. They try to attack, including Dietrich using his stick of the past, but Jack easily counters him. While he casually destroys the victims, Charlotte and Valentine aren't even surprised at this point since it's a usual occurrence. Meanwhile, Thanos tries to make out what happened. With that out of the way, Jack's a bit tired, but satisfied, and figures that he has to increase his stamina. But there still seems to be some life from Dietrich, who's outraged by what happened. However, Jack points out that his guards still aren't coming out, and they are shocked at their hiding spot after hearing that. Dietrich still doesn't know what he's talking about and threatens to contact his family, but Jack stomps his face on the ground since he talks too much. Even with that, the guards still don't want to come out. So Jack threatens to attack again, and this time, they finally reveal themselves. With how late they showed up, Jack figures that none of what they're seeing would have happened if they had shown up. Anyway, Jack seems to have attacked some important figure who he doesn't recognize. But Thanos informs Jack of who he just beat up. After that, Dietrich doesn't approve of Thanos calling out his name, but another kick from Jack shuts him up. With Dietrich out again, Jack gives the guards 3 seconds to explain why Thanos was attacked. But at this point, the time for talking is over, and a guard lunges at Jack with razor-sharp claws. Jack dodges this, but he hears another guard reciting something for a spell and is shocked about it. He recognizes it as the most advanced spell for a 6th circle, the mass destruction spell called Explosion. So with that, Jack figures they're planning to blow up the entire arena and everyone in it to smithereens. But if you ask me, that sounds pretty stupid. However, Jack figures they're quite the scoundrels for this. The fact these people want to blow up the entire area is crazy. However, Jack has something up his sleeve as well. He can make mana flow backward using one hand, so he clenches his fist and the guard's spell begins to tweak out. Then he gets a face full of explosion. Of course, this was Jack's doing, and it happened just the way he wanted. After that, guard number 2 charges again and attacks, but Jack dodges the attack and points out he's using his right hand again. Then Jack counters his incredibly simple attacks with a punch to the gut, and that seems to be a critical hit. During the ruckus, the guard draws a dagger to attack again, but Jack kicks it away from his hand. While he's recovering from that, Jack quickly gets behind the guy and traps him in a chokehold. One struggle later, the guy passes out and that's another problem taken care of. The other guard who was blown up wonders how a child managed to beat them all. On the other hand, Jack notices that all the mana in his body has been entangled. He finds it pretty stupid that he tried to use explosion in the academy of all places. The guard who's still on life support at this point is curious about how Jack stopped his spell, but Jack interrupts him since he doesn't have to answer that. He'll be the one asking the questions, so he asks the guard why Thanos was beaten up. The guard remains silent, but Jack doesn't need his answer anyway. He's sure they messed Thanos up because he's a commoner, which meant he won't be able to fight back. Anyway, Jack asks for compensation for his stolen potion. The guard informs him that this chaos caused by one potion can make House Herman become his enemy. But to Jack, that single potion is more important than whatever House Herman wants to do. Normally, the potion costs 40 gold, and since 5 days have passed, there's going to be an interest. A few calculations later, the total amount Jack will take is 5,000 gold. However, he knows that a bottom-line guard like him can't cough up such cash. So he stomps the guard's back and heads over to his next target. Jack approaches Dietrich, who looks terrified, but luckily, Jack isn't going to beat him up anymore. However, he wants to collect all the loot he has. Jack has pretty much hit the jackpot. He gained 3 checks worth 2,000 gold each and a pouch of 60 gold. At this rate, he'll be making it to the top of the Forbes list. With how much cash he gained, Jack considers Dietrich lucky to have such cash. On the other hand, Dietrich wants to know who he's dealing with since he's never seen anyone who has given him such whooping. Jack then smiles and pats the guy's head. Even though the time for introduction is long gone, he introduces himself as Jack. Dietrich is shocked to hear this and instantly recognizes he's the one from House Valantier and Phelan's brother at that. From this, it appears he's a friend of Jack's older brother. It's not a surprise given that both of them are equally jerks. Normally, Jack doesn't like to mess with kids, but people like Dietrich here are an exception to this. Jack puts his foot into Dietrich's mouth and figures he's pretty much useless without him using his family's name as a get-out-of-jail-free card. On top of that, he's a 4th circle mana user, and all his circles were gained through mana transplant surgery. Dietrich's the kind of guy who's been spoon-fed everything he owns, and all he can do is torment people who are putting in actual effort. He's very lucky he's still a child. If not, things would have gotten pretty dark for him. Then Jack reminds him of his name, and even gives him his address in case he wants a rematch. However, he'd better be prepared to sign his death warrant if he shows up. Of course, Dietrich is frozen in fear after hearing this, and even wets himself. Now that's done, Jack wants to leave and calls Charlotte. As for Thanos, the offer still stands, and he can come over if he's interested. Apparently, the half-alive chef is much better than Jack's expectation, so he also invites Thanos for a meal. But Thanos doesn't exactly know what to do next. Jack then remembers the firework festival that's coming up at night. The fireworks are just explosion spells fired at the sky, and the question is if Jack will go to see them. A festival is usually held in the Azenbul Duchy 2 to 4 days before classes start. This is normally held to welcome new and returning students to the academy. If we forget what we saw earlier in the day, the academy is a prestigious one. Several officials of high positions in the kingdom all graduated from the academy. This includes the king, queen, princess, a duke or two, and the list goes on. People who graduate are set on the path to success. However, things may not be like that for long. According to Jack's memory, 4 or 5 years later, the Thessalon kingdom will be defeated. However, Jack wishes they'd get wiped out sooner. Valentine expresses her disgust, and Jack is surprised by this. He hopes his master didn't hear his wish, or even worse, read his mind. But luckily, she's talking about the so-called prestigious academy. After experiencing that assault, she's disappointed that all the supervisors in the place are just for show. And this is supposed to be a place that'll raise the people who'll run the kingdom. It turns out she's the founder of the academy, but she expected something like that to happen at some point. The supervisors usually aren't for decoration, and they make sure students obey the rules. One rule states that all students are equal in the academy, and another one states that the academy mustn't get involved in politics. As time went on, those rules were forgotten to time, and the remaining officials did whatever they wanted. While that's disappointing to Valentine, she points out that Jack's still hiding more things, like the whole info about dragons and the Thulkan Empire. Seeing where she's getting at, Jack asks if she wants to hear the long story about that. Rather, she smiles and then changes her mind about hearing that story. Shortly, the fireworks start and they light up the sky. While all the dancing and festivities go on, Jack takes a moment to appreciate the peaceful moment. After a while, Charlotte gets curious about how her boss is such a skilled fighter. Of course, he gained all his skills from having lots of experience. From that reply, she figures that Jack must have killed a lot of people to become that good, and this confirms the fact that Jack's from the future, or rather went back 20 years in time. This conversation reminds Jack of the one he had with Ron, who's still traumatized after hearing he'll die an untimely death. Anyway, This is the first time Jack's ever meeting with Charlotte. He rarely visited Azenbul in the past, and he never saw her until the time they ran into each other. In fact, he has never seen a vampire outside the Forest of Monsters. On the day Vivienne died, Velactus wanted to kill Charlotte as well. This means it's likely that Charlotte died in Jack's past life when she was 10. With all those in mind, Jack wants to know why Charlotte is curious about his fighting ability. At first, she stutters, but nervously explains that she wants to become a good fighter like her boss. From this request, Jack can tell she's gone through quite a bit in the past, and now she wants to change her powerless self. So Jack easily accepts her request, and her training starts the next day. Then she gets startled by how sudden it is. After all, she wants to become a good fighter, so the training must start quickly. For the first step, she'll start with making a mana heart. Then they'll have to see if Charlotte's more suited to fighting or magic. After hearing that, she smiles and is willing to work hard in training. Now that's settled, tomorrow's going to be a pretty busy day for them. Jack and Charlotte begin training at a vacant lot near the manor. Charlotte is exhausted, so she falls to the ground and Jack commends her effort. From that, she wonders if she's finally a mana user, and Jack says she is. Just as he expected when he saw her, she's very talented. Not only does she have a high mana sensitivity, but she's also pretty good at holding mana in her heart. It's almost like she was born for this. She managed to create her first mana circle in one day, so Jack sums that up for the day. He helps her up from the ground, but she's so tired that she immediately falls on a bench and dozes off. After that, Valentine wonders if Jack's going to tell her about her speed in creating a mana circle. Normally, this would take 2 to 3 days for a first-timer, and figures it's difficult to understand him. Even Jack agrees with this. Anyway, he figures that the head of the Magician's Tower may have tried to make her a student. But if it weren't for Jack's help, it would have taken up to a day for her to create a mana circle. Apparently, he set up a mana circle on the ground, and Charlotte can gather mana from the air with it. It also creates a wall around, and Jack can control all the mana within the circle towards Charlotte. While that may sound simple, it's not easy for anyone to pull off. Add that to Charlotte's hard work, and one mana circle is up. Valentine, on the other hand, finds it interesting after seeing how Jack is generous with those close to him. Anyway, next on the list is Tanos. Jack spots him crying, but Tanos denies doing such a thing like that and he wipes his face. After a bit of observation, Jack figures that Tanos isn't seeing much progress and wonders if he's about to give up. His accuracy seems to be on point. After Charlotte created her mana circle in 10 hours, he figures that Tanos feels inferior and wishes that she's not equally as talented in swordsmanship. Of course, becoming the greatest swordsman on the continent isn't going to be an easy goal. But at this point, Tanos feels defeated, so he drops to his knees and begins to sob. Jack discovers that, unlike his tough physical appearance, he's very soft on the inside. He then asks if Tanos is willing to throw away his dream just because of one child. So he pats his head and assures him that he can achieve his dream. However, it's still not going to be easy, no matter how much he wants it. So he has to stop crying and never give up. Tanos, on the other hand, is surprised that Jack believes in him. In fact, Jack is the first person to seriously believe him. Everyone else laughed at him since they all thought he couldn't achieve his dream. With that, Jack figures there are currently 2 kids living in his house. Anyway, Tanos reaches out to Jack and thanks him since he's the only person who believes in him. Jack never expected this adorable side of him, but he tells him to keep on working hard. As far as Jack knows, hard work has never let him down. Thanks to it, he's currently the strongest swordsman on the continent. But still, he can't help but feel sorry for Tanos and wants to cheer him on. Shortly, someone arrives at the area and Jack withdraws his hand. Now he's on full alert concerning the mystery guest that's approaching. This feeling of being surrounded is familiar to Jack, but it isn't a nice one. Like an NPC that has detected a hidden enemy, Jack's ready for battle. While Tanos is unaware of the situation, Jack orders him to get Charlotte, who's sleeping, and come to him. Tanos picks up the urgency of the matter, so he rushes off. Meanwhile, Jack searches for the quintet and Gwyneth the cook. He detects them after a while and discovers they've all been knocked out. Shortly, Tanos arrives with Charlotte and Valentine comes along too, and the attackers finally reveal themselves. The person behind this assault is Dietrich, and he's back for revenge. With how things are, Jack doesn't need to hold back anymore for the brat. After all, he did make it clear that he would kill him if he wanted a rematch. Before the epic showdown, we have a look at Dietrich's side of the story. He's destined to be the Marquis of a domain in the East. He believes that the world is run by power, and the power of one's house will become their power. Since Jack's getting in his way, he doesn't see a reason to not eliminate him. However, if he does that, he'll get in trouble with House Azenbul, specifically Ramel. But in his defense, Jack did attack him first, and he even has a witness to that. So, he could turn this encounter into another war between Houses Herman and Valentier. By his side is the master of the Pentanil Guild, Bentamon. Even though Jack may be strong, Dietrich believes a 9th Circle user is enough to take care of him. Before the attack we're witnessing, Bentamon is briefed about the mission. The target is Jack Valentier. He stays with Charlotte, who was admitted into the academy through special ways. And there's Thanos, a fourth-year student at the academy. One thing they had to keep in mind is that Charlotte's making a mana heart from the fact she's been in the same spot for quite a while. As a result, the target can't leave the training ground for a while, which is good news to Dietrich. No matter how talented she is, he believes that it will take her 2 days minimum to make a mana heart. Another bit of intel is that there's a cook and 5 servants from House Azenbul who have been located in the manor. So the plan is to knock them out and minimize conflict with House Azenbul. As for the chances that the Knights of House Azenbul will spring into action, Dietrich is positive that nothing's going to happen. Out of nowhere, a fire breaks out in the Duke's manor. Since people will be busy dealing with that, they won't have time to worry about Jack at the manor. With that, things are going smoothly, and nothing's going to interrupt them. So Operation Slay Jack is officially a go. That entire operation cost Dietrich 500k in gold to set up, so it better be worth it for him. Anyway, with this flawless plan, he believes that Jack is a dead man now. However, Thanos and Charlotte step forward. Both of them are determined to stall the soldiers while Jack escapes. Even though Thanos is shaking, he thanks Jack for believing in him and takes the blame for everything that's happening. So he wants to make things right and stall them, while Jack runs away. On the other hand, Jack admires this display of courage but finds it stupid either way. It seems he managed to inspire both of them, and while it feels nice to be protected, he asks them to get behind him. He can't afford to put them in danger all in the name of protecting him, so Jack has no other choice but to unleash his power. Before he can cast any killer spells, Valentine stops him from doing whatever he wanted to do. Apparently she wants to handle them by herself. On the other hand, Dietrich is shocked to discover that the mysterious doll can walk and talk. Before he can go on, Valentine begins to glow under the moonlight. The light emerging from her is so bright, and it flashbangs everyone. A short while later, she is transformed from the doll into her original human self. So with that, the extraordinary hero who held one of the highest positions in the continent and brought mankind to the top is finally back after 400 years. Of course, Dietrich and his gang are shocked by this transformation. Jack welcomes his master as a proper human this time. Before he can say anything extra, he receives a sudden uppercut to the jaw. While that hurt, Jack's reminded of the time he brought Valentine out of the cave. Back then, he completely disregarded her opinion and did what he wanted. Besides, he did say he would be ready to receive a beating from her. Now that's been settled, the next matter is clothes. Jack orders Dietrich to hand over his coat. Of course, he's shocked by this sudden demand, but Jack tells him to give it anyway. Now the situation has become incredibly awkward, but Dietrich hands over his coat. Jack puts the coat on his master. He also doesn't regret taking her out of the cave since it was the right thing to do, regardless of her opinion. He's aware that there's no way she would want to remain in that cave, so Valentine should forget about the point of wanting to remain locked up in there. From what she's seen, she figures that humans are still animals of desire in the end. The reason why she made the human world much different from monsters was because she thought they'd be different. But she was wrong and finally realized there's no reason for humans to be separated from other species. Apparently Jack wanted her to realize this for herself, which is why she brought her out of her introvert cave. However, he assures her that she never made the wrong choice in the past, but simply trusted the wrong person. As a result, she was unable to see the results of her creation. Valentine figures that the cave was a prison she locked herself in. Now she owes Jack for the rescue and calls him her student. Jack is surprised after she calls him that. Even though she's aware that Jack's a full-grown adult who went back in time, she still treated him like a child. Now Jack feels good after being called her student. Anyway, Valentine points out the fact Dietrich tried to harm her student and is ready to destroy him. He on the other hand realizes that he's in real danger now. He begins to panic and sends all his soldiers after them. Before they can get anywhere, Valentine has already cast her spell. She summons some giant skeleton-looking thing from the ground, and it's over for them. Somewhere in the Thulkan Empire, this spell's enough to bother some guy who's enjoying a glass of wine. His servant calls him Henkes, the man who'll become the strongest swordsman in the Empire, and wonders what happened to him. He dismisses it as nothing, but deep down, he has a feeling that something's terribly wrong. So he wonders if he's imagining things or if the world's actually going to end. Somewhere around the Dark Sea, a couple of dragons notice something about the activity of Soul Aura. They can tell it belongs to none other than Valentine. However, our friendly neighborhood dragons have a score to settle with her, including one that she put a soul restraint on. Anyway, they're impressed that a human managed to live for 400 years. Now the next question is how long she plans to rule over the world. Back on the battlefield, Valentine summons some kind of Giga skeleton thing. Even Jack doesn't know what to say about what he's seeing. The thing lets out a screech that can be heard across the battlefield and beyond. Dietrich is at a loss of words for what he's looking at since he's never seen anything like it. Shortly, the soldiers begin to disappear. almost like Thanos finally found the Infinity Stones and snapped them out of existence. Then it gets to Dietrich's turn, and his legs begin to disappear. At this point, he realized what he had just seen was death, straight up. Now that he realizes he's about to die, he begins to panic and freak out. Then death reaches out for him. Dietrich is terrified, so he begins to bargain for his life. Bro really thinks his life's worth 50 gold, after spending 500k just to die. Anyway, one grab later, and he finally vanishes. Now all the enemies are gone, a portal opens up and the skeletal monolith is gone too. After all that, Valentine turns to Charlotte and Thanos, who have just witnessed the true final boss and are frightened. Valentine approaches the both of them, reaches out, and pats them both. She recognizes Charlotte as the noble vampire, and Thanos as the hardworking warrior. Then she properly introduces herself to them, saying she's a relic of a past with a fool as a student. So she tells them to take care of Jack in the future. After a while, the info finally hits Thanos with his high ping brain. He mentions everything she said earlier is true, but he believes that Jack being a fool isn't true. With that said, she accepts the fault without a problem. This makes Jack wonder what's gotten into Valentine for her to admit that. However, he won't miss any opportunities that will make him look smart. Then Valentine shuts him up out of annoyance, being a person who's not easy to please. Anyway, she asks for some space and would like to talk with her student in private, so Charlotte and Thanos comply with her request. Before they leave, Jack informs Charlotte that there's some blood left for her if she's hungry, and also instructs Thanos to wake up the knocked-out workers. As they leave, Jack waves them goodbye and finds it fun to be around them. Next, Jack wonders what Valentine wishes to discuss with her one and only student. Now Jack and Valentine are alone, and something has been on Valentine's mind for a while. She's been thinking about what her student said back in the headmaster's office when he was dealing with Brutus. The thing about dragon bones and blood. Being able to live forever without growing old has been a desire for humans, and this research for immortality involved combining different races. Valentine figures that the blood and bones of dragons also play a role in this research. Normally, humans want to live a long life. Not just that, they also want to remain young for the entire period of their lives. A long time ago, people researched how to achieve this. One certain scientist gave an opinion. His idea is that living forever is totally impossible. So he suggests extending the lives of humans to thousands of years like the dragons. Races that live for a long time like vampires and dragons have different blood, bones, and organs from races with shorter lives. And it's the same thing for their cells, how their bodies age, and even mana sensitivity. So, to make humans live for 1,000 years, they carried out experiments of combining different species. I guess you can say it was kind of successful. On one end, it failed to give humans eternal youth and immortality. On the other, they were now as powerful as orcs and elves, but they could only live for 5 to 10 more years after that. This 400-year-old research is currently going on in the Thulkan Empire, and just within 2 years, they managed to make these hybrids live for 30 more years. Valentine thought she killed everyone involved in it 400 years ago, but apparently, there were some survivors. When she discovered the research back in her day, she destroyed everyone and everything that was involved in the experiment. That includes the documents, scholars, magicians, warriors, and so on. She burned all the documents and killed everyone who was involved, but she forgot one other thing: the Dragon Lord. After Jack reveals this information, she figures that the Dragon Lord offered one of their kind as a specimen to the humans as a way to break the oath. Apparently the two lords really want to interfere with humans. However, Valentine doesn't know the dragon that was used as a test specimen, so to keep things short, Jack explains that all of the hybrids in the future can use soul aura. Valentine's shocked to hear this, so she figures that the dragon the Thulkans are using for the experiment is the offspring of the two Dragon Lords. It makes sense because the two lords are the only dragons who can use soul aura, so that would mean their offspring is capable of it too. Now combine the Dragon Lord's offspring with the 10th circle users of Thulkan, and you have soldiers who can break the wall of mana and use soul aura. Anyway, Valentine has a question for Jack. She wonders what he plans to do about this. Even though she's a relic of the past and doesn't want to get involved in the world's affairs, she's still curious. Since Jack knows the future, she's positive that he has something in store and wants to know. To be honest, Jack isn't completely sure since the experiment will be completed in 2 years. His goal was to become a 5th or 6th circle in a year, then head over to the Thulkan Empire and wreck some stuff.